they're doing a good job with that audit that they're on it. And if we do use multi-sig or we use some type of a service like a Swan or a um, anything, we have to trust that they're going to be there. So I guess I wanted to throw this out to anyone willing to talk about it in a world where we are supposed to not trust and verify, in a world where you can't eliminate some element of trust. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, it's a good subject. Thanks for bringing that up. Technically, with Bitcoin, we always like to say Bitcoin is trustless, and coming from the fiat world, it essentially is. It operates and feels trustless. But really, what it does, the network itself, is it distributes trust and it minimizes trust. And of course, the more nodes that we have, and the more people that are helping to distribute and decentralize that trust, the more that trust gets minimized. But to also be clear, the whole don't trust, verify never goes away. In fact, it only gets stronger. Let's be clear. There's a third party company that is not Bitcoin and is not the Bitcoin network that made a product, and they failed miserably, horrifically, and that should not change your fate. It's like you have a bad relationship or someone cheats on you, right? Do you lose all faith in
Terrence, do you have
humanity?
to use this example?
I
It kind
know,
of
because
hurts. It
you're on your
hits.
six
Hits
pack with
home.
wife number
Well,
6,
that is
so
goes right to
Lauren
the trust
knows.
thing, like you said. Yeah, you don't trust well, like me, you trust the wrong people, and it really bites you in the ass.
I think we need to kind of
Financially, emotionally. Shade away.
shade away. Sorry, I think we need to stay away from saying it was a fatal accident. It's adding up more and more like this was actually pre-planned. You guys, let's be honest.
Well, intentional or not, as far as it comes down to trust, it wasn't the Bitcoin network that broke. SHA-256 didn't break. Proof of work didn't break. It unfortunately was a company that, a lot of us relied on because we trusted other Bitcoiners. We trusted the story that was told to us. And Bitcoin often is a story of understanding. And now we're learning that there actually were individuals that pointed out and did verify. There's now 2 clear sources that verified this failure. Their failure, I mean, I'm glad they did that, but their failure was that they didn't sound the alarm loud enough, in my opinion, because I'm looking back at when they made these notifications and let Cold Card know. Yet since Cold Card ignored them, they didn't say anything. So, but then again, you have to be careful. You don't want to cause FUD on something if it doesn't exist. So,
Terrence, there was an entire breakdown in the whole trust chain of command because a lot of us had influencers that we trusted, and those influencers, I've been reading, a lot of posts where there's conspiracy saying that perhaps they were malicious, but I don't believe that most of them were. 99% really just trusted their source within the company, maybe were paid to actually shill the product. But when you start breaking that entire trust line down, then we do have problems. And I'm totally with BT Savant when she's talking about these trust things. And in any world we've ever lived as humans, trust is a component of being alive. So I'm totally with her on this one.
yeah, I don't buy any of these conspiracy theories at all. I get it. You can make certain connections, and if stuff comes out, then great. But
That's a middle finger to you, G Money. He's laughing.
Well, if you look at the evidence there, it just points to the fact that the person doing the commits on the GitHub was actually the CTO, so under a pseudonym name. So, I mean, get out your tinfoil hats if you want, guys, but it's looking more and more like a Jewish plot.
well, yeah, completely disagree with that. But yeah, you have your opinion.
I think until otherwise proven, just deal with what your eyes and ears tell you. And I'm not as conspiratorial as some other folks that speak on this space. I try to just deal with facts, and I'm not going to rule anything out until I see it. So that there's a possibility, but myself, I would put that possibility extremely low as I see it. But you know what? I still respect other people's opinion, and I'm not trying to shit on you or anything, G Money, because I think you have a lot of really great points, and we're buddies. I don't want
Yeah,
to
no,
destroy
it's
that
all
trust.
good. I just think this is a fucking wake up call too, though, guys. Like, I mean, we need to stop being like nice about some of this stuff and just be really raw. And to the fact that all these coincidences, when they start adding up multiple times over, it's not a coincidence anymore, right? And so, like, I love you guys too, but some of you guys are being a little bit too nice, being a little bit too polite about people getting rugged for $100 million, which is obviously seems like a plot from the beginning, with people getting their wallets drained from the beginning, them ignoring multiple cases of fixing the random number generator, and even the dice rolls being added. That portion wasn't even added to the training for people to do it. I think the only people that actually put out the dice roll videos were people like BTC sessions and stuff. And so when you start, like, I agree, one of these is not a provable fact, but when you add up multiple coincidences on top of each other, it paints a different picture.
Yeah. Hey, Terrence,
But
I'm going to
G-Money,
start
I would
selling
just,
dice
can I,
for this, and they're going to be weighted dice, and I'm going to go hack it all. Anyway, go ahead, Humble,
that's
and then maybe we
awesome.
kick it
Great
down
idea,
to
Mark.
Anon for the voice of reason.
Yeah, absolutely. I do see his hand. But G-Money, I mean, I think we've talked about this many times before. We're all pattern recognizers. So I think we are all, I mean, in a group chat this morning, we all have our different theories and we all disagree with these different theories. A lot of them are conspiratorial, a lot of them are not. So you have this mix of people that are trying to figure out why, because that's what everyone wants to know, right? So I don't think that we're being too nice. We're just taking in the information, trying to understand it. And, I myself, like, I'm doing research on my end based off of what my theory is. But then you also have to be careful to share some of the information, because I did see some information go out this morning, which, would be information that people would come across eventually. But there's this risk of, okay, well, if you're going to share that information and say that thing, then maybe this person's going to wipe their profile. So, make sure the tech people are actually able to get a hold of this information before that information disappears, and it's that much harder. So, none of us are ignoring this. That's not the case, and I don't think we're being too nice about it.
But let me just quickly, before we go to Anon, just to round this up with BTC Savant. You guys know this, and I know you guys have been tired of it in the past, but it's just so relevant now. This is why over and over and over I have been pounding the table on this for 8-9 years, that multi-signature is the best that I can see that follows those two heuristics of distributing the trust and minimizing the trust. Not only because you can use with multi-vendor, pick 2 or 3 different manufacturers so you don't have to worry about any one, as we've just seen. And this also helps you with jurisdictions, if that's a problem, depending where you live in the world and what your threat vectors are, as well as geographies, and as well as your own points of failure. And finally, for inheritance. And there's just
the $5 wrench.
And the $10 hammer. A wrench.
$10 hammer.
The back of a hammer is much more effective than
the old claw.
a wrench.
Yeah, you don't want to take the old claw to the back of the head.
Correct. All right, Anon.
Hell has frozen over. I'm on G-Money's side of this. I think we need to be as toxic as possible. And I absolutely love that he's making these connections. There needs to be an explanation for why 1031, the investor in Cold Card, Matt Odell and Marty Bent's VC fund, Matt Odell was also on the board for OpenSats, right? That he founded the funding mechanism that NVK was also on the board of, that was denying funding for other open source projects and wallets. Why did Matt Odell remove the specific line in his tutorial on using Cold Card that talked about the dice rolls? Why did Matt Odell completely FUD using dice rolls in that video where he's talking about using Cold Card? Now, this isn't evidence of any malfeasance, but there are questions here that must be answered with all of that pattern in one sentence, right? You have to have all of these things together in your answer for why this happened, or also not satisfied with it.
So, Anon, you're saying that Matt is in on the take, they conspired together, and they're going to chop up everybody's Bitcoin later on? Like, I don't know where...
No, I'm saying he needs to explain why that's not the case. He needs to.
Gotcha.
Okay, so what about Peter Todd's involvement then? Because he was a spokesperson.
Yeah, I'd like to
for
have
them
an
for
answer to
many
that as
years,
well.
right?
I find Peter Todd to be one
I
of the
know
cheapest
there's so
people
many
around.
things. Yeah, there's so many things. I just want to go and say again, I don't think anyone's just sitting on this and not looking into the possibilities here. The tech guys are looking into the things they need to look into, probably don't need to be distracted by this so much. So, we have these conversations, but nobody's just sitting on their ass.
Yeah, and I'm not saying you guys are wrong either. I'm just, trying to play the other side and say, hey, and like I said, on my part, I assess what is the probability that something is going on, some shenanigans are at play. Go ahead, Big Sean. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. Yeah, to Savant's earlier point and the G Money's tone, to kind of keep it going, this backdoor and cold card brings a lot of questions we should ask, especially, if we didn't ask ourselves these questions when we set up our devices. I think the point about using closed source devices, as a signing device, we have a lot of talk here about multi-sig, multi-vendor, time lock. That's all good. But even a single sig with like a strong passphrase helps buy, time to do a right passphrase to make it secure. But my point is, we spend time learning about Bitcoin. We tell others, study Bitcoin first. Maybe it's time a lot of us spend time studying how these signing devices actually work and learn all these different methods. That's something that some hours should be put into that. And maybe that's a good benefit going forward that we have in the space.
Thomas.
I think the presumption of innocence applies to the court of law. It does not apply to risk management. And, there's enough here where I would say I would assume that a crime was committed here. I would just assume it and act accordingly. Now, if it turns out that no crime was committed, that's fine. But we're not a court of law. We're involved with risk management of our assets in a very complex world. So I think extending presumption of innocence here is ill-advised.
Yeah, 100%.
But regardless of intent, whether it was an innocent thing or diabolical, however whether you have your tinfoil hat on or not, there's still the common denominator of trust. And I think that's kind of the thing that really, I guess life involves trust 100%. I mean, we have to trust in order to do good things in the world and to do bad things and to operate in the world. So yeah, I guess our job is to mitigate trust and try to figure it out from there.
Yeah, I think a couple things happen. One, people were outsourcing the trust to, in this case, obviously to a device. If you were to break it down, it's like, oh, wow, didn't think about it. But because I heard influencers or a podcast or whatever say this is the gold standard, I just trusted what they said. I didn't, look into the device or how that works. As well, it isn't a binary thing as far as where am I going to put all my Bitcoin? I have to find the best bucket. What is the one safe for my Bitcoin? I mean, you can have 1,000 safes, and you can have one with, multi-party custody. You can have one where you're still, on an exchange like Strike or River or Swan, because you want to spend a little bit and you want to keep a little bit there. And you can have your inheritance time locked with multi-signature, and you can have a bunch of single sig wallets, but you don't need to put 20 Bitcoin in any single one wallet. We're seeing some pretty big exploits like that now, where someone had that much in a 12-word wallet with no passphrase. And it's fine because, the words themselves, when generated properly, when functioning properly, it's absolutely impossible that anyone will guess your 12 words. But as we've learned, this has sort of been equivalent to, instead of the, 2,048 words being used, it was 2. So that's how low the
That's
entropy was.
incredible. Well, I heard you in a space the other day. It
Yeah.
was one of the spaces with Wicked, who's doing a great job, by the way. Who thought an apple with a mustache could be doing such a great job? But he is. And um, you had brought up, you were a co-host on the space, and you were volunteering your time, and you were talking about 24 words being a little more secure than 12, and someone disagreed with you, and I was wondering if you could talk about
Yeah, so there's two
that.
things. There's the security of your, so once you get your private key, your key is the 256 bits. It's just as secure as any key. It's the entropy. And these are the two things, and this is the one thing that I think a lot of people bypassed, because these hardware wallets really only do two things. One, they generate entropy. They become a random generator for you if you're not using anything else. That's it. That's the main and most important thing it does, and that's what most people skipped. But the second thing is then it secures your key, whether it's a secure element or some other way to keep it from touching the internet, but allows you to sign when you need to broadcast a transaction. That's really all these devices do for you. It's the entropy. So if you're choosing 12 words or 24 words, you do get more entropy with 24 words. There's a choice of more words, and you get even more entropy by adding a passphrase, and potentially even more by adding dice rolls. At a certain point, it doesn't matter. Fred would know more about this, but you probably reach a certain point, a certain vector where adding more entropy doesn't get you anymore, because how are you going to find this one atom in 9 galaxies?
And then
Um,
it's hilarious that everyone's like, well, roll the dice. Okay, well, make sure you get a, this kind of dice. And you're like, oh no, it's just one rabbit hole after the other. It's like, oh man, am I going to get the right kind of dice? Are they top grade dice? And how it's just hilarious. Bitcoin's hilarious. You've got to laugh at it because it's just, you got to be committed. And I'm definitely committed,
Well,
but
I
I
think
should be committed.
I think people need to take it seriously though, because this is, at the end of the day, your security. Like, this requires radical responsibility, and people need to realize, like, no matter how cool they make a product, you can never replicate entropy, or you can never randomize entropy fully on computers. Okay, that's just like there is going to be eventually some pattern to all of them. Like, that's just the whole concept of computers itself. They can't totally randomize it. They can do things to trick it. Um, and so funny enough, right, the dice rolls on the cold card actually worked. I mean, I did that. That's the only reason I chose a cold card for the first place, was because I could do dice rolls. So funny enough, ironically, you could use the cold card to dice roll and get your own entropy. Buy the casino grade dice and roll your own. But like, the devices are actually still good for that specific purpose. I wouldn't use it for anything else. Um, but people need to understand the security they're getting into and how it works, because a lot of people, I think, just go into this like, oh, it's just a random thing. Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that when you dig a little bit deeper. And that's why I think moving forward, like, Terrence was saying, the only way to do this moving forward securely is to do a multi-sig with multi-vendors. And that's just what it comes down to.
And by the way, G Money, Portland Hodel actually battle tested just recently. He spent about 6 hours, I believe, testing the cold card wall device dice rolling mechanism, and it's 100% reliable according to Portland Hodel. I hope I'm not paraphrasing him, but if you go to his page, I think he might have referenced his research there.
Yeah, and I had some Satoshis in a dice rolled cold card that are still there. So those did not get swiped. But yeah. But if you still have a cold card, it's not totally worthless. I would only use it for that, because you can buy, like, the only way to get true entropy from dice rolls or coin flips, you have to buy a computer that is not connected online or Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, and like, cold card actually meets that requirement. So instead of buying a Raspberry Pi and trying to do it that way, you can use a cold card to help create entropy, and then just import that seed into like a Jade or a Trezor as a restore function. So that's kind of like, if you want to truly get your own entropy, like without any computer chip like interference, go buy a Trezor, go buy a Jade Plus, and then use the cold card dice roll feature to create your own entropy. Then you can take those dice rolls, because it's an offline device, right? Don't plug it into a computer. You can just plug it in, do the dice roll function. It'll give you the 24 words. And then you can use those words as true entropy for a multi-sig, multi-vendor setup that will probably last at least the next 5 to 10 years, depending on, where AI is.
Hey, I just wanted to clear something up too. I know British Huddle posted something yesterday about a cold card that had a dice roll that actually had its coins confiscated.
Fake news.
Yeah, fake news. Just wanted to make sure everybody had heard that. Anyway, back to you.
And it
guys.
wasn't his fault, by the way. The
Right,
guy
he just
did
forgot.
say that.
He thought that he had
Yeah.
rolled the dice, but in actuality,
Yeah. No one has broken the
nobody
dice
was
roll.
trying to be malicious or do a troll post like an Udi post recently. So it was just misinformation, unfortunately.
All right, I see Victor's hand up.
Hey, good morning, everybody. If we're entertaining conspiracy theories, and we do pattern match here, I want to start by saying previous rugs, people are like, "Hey, this is my transaction. This is terrible," blah 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 blah, and they post the receipts. So here we are today, 5 or 6 days later, 5,000 victims that are visible on the blockchain. And all these Bitcoiners here, and nobody's saying, "I'm a victim. This is my receipt." You know, I've heard a lot of attestations. Oh, I got a DM from someone, or I know someone, or I know 6 people, and I'm saying, well, I want to see one receipt. You know, just the perfect way to shut me up would be like, oh, I met you at a conference. This is my seed. That's my transaction. This thing is real. And I'm not normally crazy conspiracy theory guy, but this one bugs me. It bugs me that out of 5,000 wallets, I haven't seen one that is proven. It's the silence is deafening.
What do you mean you haven't seen one that's proven? We have
Well,
numerous examples of everyone helping people that I mean
yeah.
I've helped probably 50 people, and I've gone through their transactions.
No, 50 people. I mean, the transactions are listed in coldcardwatch.com. And I want to, okay, I'm putting myself up here as a punching bag. Fine. If I were rugged, um, and there's the notion that these Bitcoin might get taken back and distributed, how do I prove that that wallet was mine? I would say that's my transaction. Here's my seed. Only I have the seed corresponding. Well, me and the hacker who's now in jail. Give me my Bitcoin. And that is unassailable. You can't fight that. Following to that, the exploit is public. The longer you wait, the more people will have the key. And now if you have 10 people saying, oh, here's the key, that's my wallet, you got a problem. So game theory says if you have the seed, just say this is my wallet, there's my seed. And then you just wait. There's no downside to doing that.
I'm not sure I follow this logic at all. Does anyone else understand what's being said?
No, absolutely not.
No, it doesn't make any
Okay.
sense to me. It doesn't make sense
Wait,
from a privacy
Sean just raised his
standpoint either.
hand. Let's see if Sean can jump in here.
I may be a little bit off, but reading into what he's saying made me think of something that you had mentioned I was going to ask you about on the space here. And that's this theory that, maybe it's a white hacker that's kind of consolidating all the addresses for a possible return in the future. And Victor's kind of poorly laying out like, how do you prove it was yours that was stolen? I don't know if that's somewhat what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, you can prove it today. If you had funds stolen, you could easily prove it. Either you could, just prove you have the key. I mean, maybe technically you could just sign a message using the same key, but if if there's the theory that hacker and victim are colluding, that doesn't help you.
So I guess, Terrence, maybe we can take it in a different direction. There was a space where a gentleman, I think it was one of Wicked's spaces, where he's like, I see 78 more addresses that are vulnerable. Should I sweep it and protect it for them before hackers do? Well, in that case, how do you ever end up giving that back to the right people? How can they prove that? Have you ever dug into that angle of it?
Was that question for Terrence?
Yeah, it was. But if he's, in the bathroom or whatever, anybody else can answer that. Because I don't know. I think the questions that Victor brings up is interesting. I don't know that we need to spend a lot of time for it because this is still just a theory. But how would they get it back?
Let me just ask one thing and then I'll jump down. Does anybody personally know someone that got rugged and can prove it? Is there a receipt for anybody?
Yes,
And
that's what I'm telling you, Victor. It's what I've been doing for 4 days, almost 24/7. These are all people. It's all completely verified. I'm working directly with them.
what is there to do? If I got rugged, it's the FBI's issue now.
Well, because all you're concentrating on is them trying to get it back. I'm I'm dealing with them on what they have left, on how to have a better security and
No, I
how
understand
to
that.
get all their paperwork
Yeah,
together for
why are we
when they.
wasting our time with this, Terrence? Like literally,
Yeah.
like
Yeah, I
it's
don't know.
yeah.
I'm just trying to be nice here and try to follow this. It doesn't make sense to me at the
Anyway,
moment, but
I want to see if I want to see a victim provably with a receipt. That's what I thank you guys. Thanks. Yeah.
yeah, well then look
Talk
at
to you
my
then.
profile. I've posted a lot of them. I just posted one yesterday of someone with 17.39 Bitcoin. He's someone we all know.
Yeah. Can you prove it with a private key with the signature or a seed?
He can, but he doesn't need to. I don't. I'm anyways.
That's what I'm
Let's say
saying.
hello to Dark, Victor. I think we're done with this
Okay.
subject. I
Thanks.
really don't see what
Thanks,
it
guys. All
helps.
right. All
Yeah.
right. Okay. Thanks for entertaining my conspiracy theory.
Hey, Dark.
Hey guys, thanks, Victor. You're making me feel better about my conspiracy theories.
Hey, I'm feeling better about mine too. Good morning, Dark.
Good morning. Cold carded out, guys. What a disaster. And look, it's been said a million times: multi-sig, multi-vendor, end of story. Like that's how you be your own bank. And I'm really glad, because I don't know how. Like, I guess I have a background in cyber intelligence, so like I landed on that as being the most secure way a couple of years ago, and went that route. And I've always recommended anybody who had a few $1,000s or more, get yourself with Unchained or learn how to multi-sig yourself, one of the two. And I think that proved to be right. But at the same time, look, I recommended for people getting started to go to BTC sessions, right? So, on that front, I guess guilty is charged. Um, just a disaster. But man, there's so much more to talk about. The world's going absolutely berserk. And there's,
Well, can you enlighten us, Dark, on that, on what's going on? What should we be paying attention to that we definitely have not been paying attention to?
yeah. So look, on the fiat front, right? Like the reason why I Bitcoin is because I think I have a pretty good understanding of fiat and how it works or how it doesn't work. And over the last week, we've seen some crazy developments in fiat land, specifically coming out of Japan. But involving Western banking system, right? So you have Japan, who's been trying to intervene in the yen to protect their currency at the expense of their bond market, and they spent, I think it was like last week sometime, maybe about a week ago, they spent I think $75 billion to intervene, and by the next day, half of that intervention was lost. And it looked like, man, it was just going to completely fail. And then Scott Bessent stood up and said, wait a minute, we're going to protect the yen, meaning me and you. But I think there's a bigger story here because, Thomas and I, we were discussing this on Bitcoin veterans. Look, when we say we're going to defend the yen, the United States, the Treasury, what does that really mean? Like that means we're going to print US dollars, we're going to buy yen with them. But when we buy yen, who are we buying them from? Where is that money that we're printing going? Right? That's going to JP Morgan, to Swiss, the Swiss banks, that's going to Jane Street and Susquehanna and all the financial institutions that are arbitraging these trades. It's literally the looting of the US Treasury, right? Like, what business do we have intervening in the Japanese currency, right? It is now the job of the United States to protect the Japanese citizen from inflation because their central bank acted recklessly for 20 years. Like, that is so insane on its face, but that's where we are today. And not only that, but like I've been watching, you know, business news this morning. not a mention. Like, yeah, almost as if, this is just standard banking system behavior. Right. And, like, I'm not even picking on the Fed now. Now we're just picking on the Treasury. Like, the Fed's doing swap lines, whatever. They're up to their own shenanigans. Now it's like it's coming home directly to the US Treasury, like right to you and me. Right? We can't even blame the Fed for this one. This is just us. We are now literally handing money out, printing money, handing it out to banks and institutions, and we are intervening in another country's inflation problem, as if we have things totally under control over here. So if you ask me why I Bitcoin, this is why I Bitcoin, because this is unsustainable. Like, we can't bail out the entire Western financial system. Are we now going to bail out Europe because of poor policy decisions they've made? Are we like, where does this stop? And it will stop with Japan, because these bailouts will fail. Like, this will not work. The global financial system will call bullshit on this scheme for sure. So, look, I think there's been a really strong bid in Bitcoin for the last week, ever since this Japanese thing started to unravel. And just to add, you see gold and silver kind of catching a bid now as well. And I think it goes directly to people's, looking at this absolute con job that's being launched by the US Treasury and central banks, and calling bullshit. And at some point, like, somebody's going to make a major policy error and things are going to break. So that's just one. I mean, I could go on and talk about paper representations of real atoms and what's going on in the oil market and what's going on in other markets, and why, the entire flipping system is a joke. But I'm just going to land it with the yen and currencies, because I think, man, if you just gain an understanding of the racketeering that's going on inside of the Western banking system, you'll understand the importance of Bitcoin. And I'll land the plane there.
I think
Leo, you have your hand up.
piggyback.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah,
Just
it's a question
piggybacking on
for
what he said.
Pablo.
If you piggyback on Dark Side, what he said about the intervention, you have to think about, this is what we were talking about on Bitcoin veterans. What is being said in the room that's not being made public? You don't just casually intervene in the foreign forex markets without having a reason to do so. So you can think about what are those things that would cause it. And I would simply say this: we've seen the Bank of Japan try to intervene and keep the yen below 160 on the exchange rate. You can do it by selling U.S. treasuries, or you can raise interest rates, or a combination. Neither one of those things are good for the U.S. U.S. doesn't want to see treasury dumps. And if they have the interest rates go up, the yen carry trade starts to affect the equity markets right before the election. So I just think they're going to pull out all the stops to do everything they can to keep the market up, everything from keeping the equity prices high to keeping oil prices low. That would be my base case going into November.
Dark Side, what I was going to say is, since you brought up Bessent and Japan, did you read Bessent's comments on Satoshi and Bitcoin, and what do you make of it?
I think he's like a comedic figure. Like, the thought that you would put one of George Soros's underlings. And by the way, every time Bessent has gone out on his own and tried to do something, he's failed miserably. Okay, so the thought you put him in charge of the U.S. Treasury is a joke. So I don't take anything he says seriously, because he's a cowardly liar, for lack of a better description, and he's a failure too. He tried to start his own hedge fund and he failed. Like, uh, it's so frustrating to me. And we throw around numbers. Oh, we're just going to intervene with $100 billion. Well, what could we do with $100 billion? Could we rebuild every failing school in America with $100 billion? Probably. You could probably, with $100 billion, I think you could build a home for almost every homeless person in America. That's how much money we're talking about. And they're just throwing it around like it's, we're going to throw 100 billion here, 100 billion there, and we're going to slow the bleeding in the Japanese story. Well, the Japanese story is a catastrophe. Their currency is crashing at the same time their bond market is failing. Like it's happening in simpatico. And by the way, like, just common economics, if your bond yields are going higher, your currency should strengthen on its own. But the exact opposite is happening in Japan. Their bond yields are going up and their currency is going down, which means there is no solution to their problem but failure. They
But
can't
Dark,
pick. Go ahead.
it's my understanding they use euros to buy those yen. Is that correct?
Whatever. You got to understand how the Western banking system works, right? Like
Right, but isn't that Europe bailing out the yen instead of America?
no, it's
Like we have to be like I understand it's under the jurisdiction of the Treasury, right? Because all
no.
those fucking bails are all insolvent and they probably are failing, so they have to be under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Treasury.
Okay, so
But at the end of the day, let's not mince words here. The Europeans are bailing out Japan right now, not the Americans.
That's not true. That's fundamentally not true.
Why not?
I'll explain to you. So when Japan intervened, I think last week, my guess is that the Fed provided a swap line to the Swiss, who then provided euros to Japan to try to obfuscate what was really happening. The Europeans are broke. Okay. There's no political will in Europe to bail out Japan. And we cannot audit the Fed, which we should be able to audit. I think we all agree on that. So my guess would be that they used a set of parallel swap lines so that they look like they're protecting the U.S. bond market, because our bond market's not exactly roaring right now. We're at yields we haven't seen since 2007, and we know what happened in 2008. So, like, we're not exactly hitting the ball out of the park over here. So, to your point, persistence, my guess, if I had to bet, I would bet that we provided a $100 billion swap line to the Swiss or to the ECB, and the ECB then went ahead and forwarded that line over to Japan, and it was all about obfuscation and nothing about providing transparency into what's going on. Because remember, as Thomas said, if we don't provide them the swap line, then they have to go out and get the dollars somewhere, because when they buy the yen, they buy it with dollars, right? And if their threat is, look, we're just going to sell 100 billion in U.S. Treasuries, well, you can understand where they would have us over a barrel, because as I just explained, our rates haven't been this high in almost 20 years. So again, don't believe what you read in the mainstream media. Right, like
I guess my point is,
I will bet you
my point is,
that the
we are making progress though. If you look at the amount of debt that's moving from onshore to offshore is astronomical. The majority of the debt is no longer being held domestically; it's being held by foreign entities, and that's probably because the Europeans love to run up a fucking credit and they don't like to answer for it. So the whole reason Japan is in this mess is because the European banks decided they were going to use 0% interest rates to have a fucking new yacht. Okay. So I understand what you're saying. And I agree that we should be aware of this.
The whole reason they're in this mess, let me just explain to you what you just said. The whole reason Japan's in this mess is because the European banks borrowed money from them at 0%, as if Japan, which runs an account surplus, is not a sovereign nation, didn't control their short. The Japanese central bank, the JCB, could not have raised rates and could not have normalized. Japan, which I think somewhere around 250% debt to GDP, they're the ones who chose to sell that much debt. Okay, but it's Europe's fault. It's European banks' fault that Japan committed
well, it's not the Japanese people's fault. We know that. It's not the Japanese people's fault. We can admit that, right? They didn't make the yields off of those.
Well, we could argue about that, because the Japanese people have basically thrown up their hands in complete frustration and have taken all of their money, invested it overseas, right? Because they didn't have it in Japan. Now, is it their fault? We can go back and forth on, well, does voting really matter? I know G Money's here. He's going to say, well, no, they had no control because those politicians were selected, not elected. We go down that never-ending role of whose fault it is, but it's certainly not Europe's fault that Japan, took a sword and stabbed themselves right, in the gut with it. But now that we're here, okay, we can talk about whose fault it was. Now that we're here, I don't see a way out. Persistence. I totally disagree with you, because if Japan goes down, we're going down right behind it, and so is Europe, and so is the entire Western banking system.
But do you think the contagion effect will reach all the way to the United States, or would it stop at the European banks? My
In
question.
hours. If it could even make it hours.
So it's a national security threat at that point.
Of course it is. Why do you think we're intervening in the Japanese bond market, in the
Right.
Japanese
Okay,
currency?
that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah.
We are completely fucked.
But Dark, just real quick, and I'll let you. And I'll drop down. Sorry to interrupt. Don't you agree that we have to facilitate this intervention from the euro dollar and the treasury dollar? Like that intervention has to be facilitated, and it doesn't have to be as messy as everyone makes it seem. Like these Cayman Island motherfuckers, if they want to hold.
Did we lose persistence?
Right, and the UK is the same way.
We did.
Sorry.
Yeah, we lost you there, man. I'm sorry.
He's still being
I only
persistent, though.
I heard the first word and the last word,
Yeah.
but I missed your statement.
No, I just think we're set up to be able to completely segregate ourselves from the European euro-dollar system, and I think that would be great for the country, and we could prosper after that. That's all I'm saying. Thanks for the time, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I understand the argument. I disagree with it, but I don't discount it, right? I don't think the way the banking system is structured, I don't believe that we can, disconnect ourselves from the euro dollar, European banks, Japanese banks. I think the amount, we talk now, we go back to Warren Buffett. The one right thing I agree with Warren Buffett throughout his career, derivatives are financial weapons of mass destruction. Now, if you believe that, and I do, and you know that there's a quadrillion, maybe $2 quadrillion, not that any of us know what a quadrillion is, but let's just assume we do. If there's a quadrillion or 2 quadrillion of derivative exposure throughout the Western financial system, what does that mean? Like, that means that you have counterparties throughout all of the different institutions, from New York to San Francisco to London to Paris to anywhere in Germany, all the way to Tokyo, right? And everywhere in between, that are all tied to each other. And you just mentioned the Cayman Islands. You have to remember the Cayman Islands, what's going on down there, that's just our large hedge funds doing the basis trade. They're buying bonds and they're shorting derivatives against those bonds, and they're picking up pennies in front of a steamroller. That's all that is, right? That's all contrived fake capital that's being backstopped by these derivatives. So again, like, this concept that we can somehow, cleanly extricate ourselves from decades.
Well, let me define clean, because clean doesn't mean that everyone makes it out alive. That means that there's a couple of hedge funds that are going to get their heads chopped off. But hey, if they want to play in that ball game, then they know they've had plenty of opportunities to divest in all their bad equities. So I don't know. I really appreciate the time, Darko. Thank you so much.
No, I appreciate it, man. And look, it's a good debate, right? I disagree. I don't think it's a couple hedge funds. I think it's the entire banking system, right? Like, I think when over the last 2 decades, if you bought a house and you went and got a mortgage, in some weird way, the bank was borrowing that money from Japan. And like, that's hard to imagine, right? Because you got these mortgage-backed securities and you've got all this crazy stuff. But in the end, the money, the piggy bank that was loaning the money was Japan. whether directly or indirectly. And I'm obviously in the mortgage case, it's indirectly. But when that unwinds, I don't think it can be a controlled unwind. I think it's a detonation by fuse.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
All right, Hath, go ahead.
Thanks. Hey, Dark, thanks for that explanation. When you talk about quote unquote bailing out Japan, to me, I interpret it as keep the music going. Okay. So I don't think of it, and I know you're not saying it's separate, right? Japan, Europe, US, all this banking relationship is connected. But if we're paying 100 billion, or Europe's paying 100 billion through us to keep the music going, one, how long is that going to last? Two, if it's a controlled demolition at some time, like, is that what they're buying the time for? Is to set up the controlled demolition at the timing of their choosing? And is there a better place to be watching, right, than Japan to see if the music's going to stop? Thanks.
Awesome questions, man. Like awesome. Those you're asking like the $1 million questions that nobody can answer because nobody on this space understands the fiat system, right? Like the fiat system will make new rules and they'll put in new policies and they'll pull new levers to try to keep the fiat system floating. The point I'm making is, and one point I wanted to address that you made, yes, when Japan intervened, they intervened with euros. Okay, now I believe those euros really were dollars, just in the form of euros through multiple swap lines. But now, what happened this week was Bessent came out and said, I think it was on Friday actually. Bessent came out and said, screw Japan can't solve it themselves. They need us to step in. And then they did what's called a price check. That's where the Treasury, the US Treasury, calls the banks and says, where can I buy yen? They don't actually do the transaction. They just scare anybody who's short the yen to cover because they're threatening to intervene. Then on Monday, when that really didn't work out that well, they actually came out and said, you know what? We're going to intervene. If we need to, we're going to intervene. So they took the threat to the next level. Right? I dare you, the Bugs Bunny, I dare you to cross this line. And then he runs up and he draws another line in the sand and he says, I dare you to cross this line. Well, that's where we're at. Now, once the US does intervene, which I think they will be forced to do, right? They'll go ahead and just directly have the Treasury buy yen from global banks. Okay. And you'll see the yen explode in value because you've got the US Treasury, who has the printing press, buying yen. But remember, all that's doing is putting us in more debt. And we're already in too much debt. That's why our yields continue to go higher. Okay. Again, our yields haven't been this high since 2007. And taking on, let's just assume we bought Japan, like we bought the yen, right? Now we've just bought another country who's got a debt to GDP twice as bad as ours. They're at 250 percent. So how would that affect our bond market? Would foreigners want to own US bonds? Right? How about the Chinese? How about, we already know what they did to the Russians with our bonds. How about the GCC? Not that they have any money because we're busy, getting them bombed through Iran. Like the level of intervention that's going to be required once things start to unwind, it's beyond the scope of imagination. Again, going back to Warren Buffett, he's right that these are financial weapons of mass destruction, meaning they're nuclear bombs. And when a nuclear bomb goes off, you can be miles away and that shockwave blows down your house. Like you don't have to be in the blast radius, right? It's not necessarily the fire that kills you when an explosion goes off. It's the blast wave. So yeah, I'll land it there.
So like when we decide to buy and people know we're buying, is the carry trade over at that point? Are the interest rates in Japan going to go up, or are they just going to continue to stay low?
Well, arguably, if we really intervene, like in a major way, then I would think their rates would go higher because their currency would begin to strengthen versus the dollar. I just don't. Again, we've left like the rules of economics behind at this
Oh yeah.
point.
Oh
So
yeah.
I can't answer any of your questions.
I mean, I'm just
What
thinking, I guess, and I'm not smart, but if we subsume Japan, and then the world would look, and it would be the U.S. carry trade all of a sudden, and they would start killing the savers in U.S. for the next 30 years, and they'd have bought 30 more years.
But they've already been killing the savers in the U.S., right? Like through
Not as
inflation.
bad as in Japan.
Agreed, but Japan sacrificed. In other words, the savers were not killed in Japan because they just didn't invest that. There weren't the local Japanese population owns U.S. securities. Like for them, they'd rather own NVIDIA than own, Toyota because of the currency. Remember, as their currency declines, right, the value of the U.S. investment is increasing because they own dollars. So when they buy NVIDIA shares or they buy anything in the U.S., whether it's bonds or stocks, they're also buying dollars, right? You can't to invest here. You have a dollar denominated investment. Then when they sell their NVIDIA shares and they come back into a heavily weakened currency, they're winning both on their NVIDIA sale and on their currency swap. So from a Japanese investor perspective, they figured out how to play this game, right? Just take your money out of Japan. That's why Japan owns over 50% of their own bonds, the Japanese central bank. And I think now they own over 50% of their own ETFs. Like they buy their own stocks because there's no one who wants to buy them. Right? There's no buyer of Japanese stocks. The Japanese people, they're buying American stocks. This is so jacked up.
Yeah, I appreciate your patience. This helps, man. I'm just going to keep thinking about
believe
it.
me, this is like the whole thing is so jacked up and it's so, hate to use the word, but retarded that like I don't even know what the answer is. Like, no, we can't buy Japan. And the worst part of all of this, by the way, the thing that drives you the most crazy is understanding that Japan actually runs an account surplus, unlike the United States. They make, the Japan Inc., the business of Japan, they're bringing in more money because they export more than they import, which is like wild. Like that a country that running an account surplus should not have a GDP of, debt to GDP of 250%.
But I think that's the whole reason that they're in the position that they're in, right? Like they're the lead, and people can basically long them into oblivion.
Again, like the whole thing makes no sense, right? Like why did Japan have 0% interest rates for all this time? Well, because the world was just handing them money. The world was doing the carry trade. And I hate to say this, but it's a crime, right? Like they looted the country. They asset stripped the country. And now it's going to collapse, as all of these things do. Now, the question is, what does that collapse look like? And nobody here, I promise you, including me and definitely me, nobody has any clue what this looks like.
Dark, I think it collapses in a state totalitarianism, right? Or maybe not state totalitarianism, but mobilization and a de facto militarized state, right? Like that's
been the history of the world, right? Is when your currency collapses, you go to war.
Yeah,
so
because
something to blame it on,
right? Because I think what we're missing here too is the military. The military perspective on all these central bank movements, right? I mean, there's an incredible amount of conflict in the South China Sea. We're strategic partners with Japan. It would kind of make common sense. It would make sense for us to be supporting Japan as far as we could, especially in context of what's happening in Ukraine and then hot wars in the Middle East. I mean, this, to me, the elephant in the room is the military. The hot wars going on everywhere. And, it almost seems like the finance side is subordinate to that now. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I don't believe that any of the hot wars are necessary, right? So, why are we in war? Why are we at war with Iran? Like, what's the argument there? Um, when we started the war, the Strait of Hormuz was open. Oil was, down in the 50s, I think. Not the day it started, but before it started. Before the tension started, and things were kind of rocking and rolling. So I'm not really sure why we're at war with Iran and why we've caused the crisis we have. But putting that aside, we go to the Ukraine. Like, I think we all kind of, anyone who studied it knows what happened in 2014, knows about the coup, knows about our interventionism into the Ukraine, knows what we did with Russia's bonds, their sovereign money that they held in U.S. debt that we seized. Like, I think that's Bit Blanca talking. So from my perspective, like, all of this is unnecessary. There's not, I haven't heard a good argument why we should be at war with anybody. And I can make a really good argument why we shouldn't be at war with anybody, because our cities are a flipping mess. Our people are struggling. Half of our country is basically on UBI at this point. Um, we have tremendous challenges at home that we should be addressing. So my argument would be, until you get your own house in order, stop breaking others.
I mean, I definitely agree with you. I mean, peace is ideal, and I don't know how we got to where we are. I guess what I'm trying to pull out of this is, you got people like Ray Dalio saying that World War III is a coin flip, and I think at the higher levels, when monetary policy starts coming into alignment with military policy, I mean, that's kind of a general trend that we're heading in a very dangerous direction. And I think what I'm trying to understand is, that seems to be the dominant, most powerful trend, and I don't know what changes that. And for my personal planning factor, I think that's kind of what I'm trying to get signal out is how
Yeah.
dicey does the world get in the next 10 years? Because I don't see an off ramp. I don't see things getting less dangerous. So I don't know.
Well, look, man, first of all, I agree with Ray Dalio. And when the Ukraine targeted an Iranian container ship, and it sunk it, I think those wars have now merged. Not that they weren't merged before, right? I mean, basically, they're two proxy wars between the same fighting countries, right? On one side, you have Russia and China, and on the other side, you have the US. Right, we're funding Ukraine and giving them targeting information, satellite information, weaponry. And on the other side, you have Russia and China that are doing the exact same for Iran. And now, when those two wars merge at some point, you could have World War III like ignite in a heartbeat. I've been kind of following this subject, and when Arch Duke Ferdinand was assassinated, nobody saw World War I coming, right? Like, people just looked back, 2 years later and said, "Wow, that was obvious." So, man, it's a crazy time. But I do agree with you that when military policy sort of merges with monetary policy, and basically both, what I think that means is that both the military begins to fail at the same time the currency begins to fail. Man, that's a dangerous combination, right? Because poor leadership on top of that has really dire consequences.
Paula, welcome to the stage.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's a great conversation. I was just wondering what it would mean for Bitcoin going forward.
I think the excessively large ink cartridge is probably going to come out. Is that what you're saying, Dark?
Well, look, I mean, my argument is the excessively large ink cartridge is already out. Like, they tell us we have a $2 trillion deficit, but last year our debt went up $3.5 trillion. So somewhere $1.5 trillion is just, being created in the system. And I don't understand where it comes from. I'm not smart enough.
Has there been $1.5 trillion worth of assets destroyed?
I just don't know. I don't. Again,
maybe that's the other side of the equation. I mean,
well,
like
maybe
maybe
it's.
those assets had to be destroyed for these other ones to be allowed in.
I don't know, man. All I can tell you is that our debt, which we have to pay interest on, is growing at 3.5 trillion a year. And that's with the economy moving forward. So if the economy goes sideways or backwards, that number goes to $5 or $10 trillion very quickly. And we're just not in a position where we can afford at some point, are we going to get to the point where 100% of our tax receipts goes to pay interest? Just the interest. Forget about, entitlements and then military spending and then government spending, like just the interest. Are we going to get there? Because that's where we're headed, right? Like we're headed directly there. And a lot of our GDP right now is used to create bombs. But the problem with creating a bomb is that when you drop it, it explodes and then it's worth nothing. Okay. You didn't really create anything that's of value other than you've exploded something. Right now, if you were going to borrow money and invest in businesses that were going to grow and create jobs and be productive for society, okay, then deficit spending like happened after World War II, that makes sense to me because you're building your economy back up again after a war. But what we're doing now is we're creating this fake GDP because, again, you drop the bomb and it explodes, and now that bomb's worthless and you haven't created anything. Like, if this plan really worked, then why don't we just borrow a whole bunch of money, right? Build a millions of cars, hire all these people, then take the cars and put them on boats and drop them into the Mariana Trench. Right? The reason why you don't do that is because it's not productive. And at the same time, as my buddy Wade points out, right, every time you drop or build one of these bombs, our military entitlements, veteran benefits, because people get injured and you go through these foreign conflicts, those numbers explode higher. And of course, that's not calculated into GDP too. I think currently veteran benefits now are over $500 billion. So like the entire concept that military spending is good for America, that's laughable. Yeah, I mean, it's good for people that own Raytheon stock and a few employees at Raytheon, but you're not building anything of value over time.
I feel like if you look at just Iraq, because it ran for a long time, that was profitable for some people, even though it wasn't profitable for the U.S. I think the net was like many trillions in profit for our decision to go to Iraq. I mean, somebody's making money off of it. I mean, I think it's a transfer. I don't think it's fair.
Yeah,
but it kind of makes sense. Like I see,
call it looting, right?
But it's like the thermodynamics of it still like aren't breaking rules. It's just it got shifted. It's really hard to picture, like you said, because it's clown world. But it's like these bombs are like capital expense for future reconstruction revenue.
Yeah, but not our reconstruction.
We're not part of the club. I agree.
No, but you got to remember, like, this is like our country. Like, we have problems at home, and everything you're describing is what I'm describing, right? Like, the money to reconstruct Ukraine Americans will not benefit from that. They'll be hurt from that because they'll have to pay the interest on the debt, right?
I totally agree.
They're looting our country, literally looting it. Like, if you and I looted, the local Elks Club and we stole all the money, yes, the argument would be the money was donated, and yes, it ended up in somebody's hands. Thermodynamically, the money didn't disappear, right? But the Elks Lodge still got looted. We stole the money.
Correct. But we are. But is there somebody who's like arguing that we aren't being looted?
Yes. Okay. Alan Farrington argues in the Capital Strip Mine. He wrote this a few years ago. Go read it. Everything you're describing, you're trying to articulate it. That's precisely what it is. It's just a capital strip mine. It's the last little bit. It's the conclusion of the quote unquote capitalist system, and everybody's just looting everything they can. They're calling it we're short. They're going to use words like we're shoring up the bond market, whatever the hell. They're going to call it whatever it is. In reality, they're just stealing everything, dude, and they're doing it legally. There's that quote by that French philosopher. that they're just going to write the laws that allow them to do it. So therefore, it's not illegal. It's just like lobbying. Lobbying is not bribery. I'm just donating to his campaign, right? So you're describing the whole thing. I'd recommend you guys go read it. It's The Capital Strip Mine by Alan Farrington.
Could not agree with you more. And by the way, this is why I Bitcoin. Let's bring it back to Bitcoin, right? I Bitcoin because I'm outside of the system. I self custody because I'm outside of the system, right? This is why I do it, right? I've told my story many times. I was a gold and silver bug, and in 2013, I found Bitcoin, and I found that to be a better self custody asset than gold and silver. And I was a guy who traded on Wall Street for 25, 28 years, right? And I took all my profits, all the money I made, and I bought gold and silver with it. I never bought stocks and bonds because I understood the system. I watched what happened with long-term capital management in 98. I watched what happened with the Russian contagion. I watched what happened with the dot-com bust. I watched what happened with the 0809 crisis, right? Like, I know. You don't, like, there's people out there that will convince you not to believe your eyes, right? Like, I know what I've seen. I know what's going on in the world, right? To me, the only answer to protecting yourself when the fucking shit hits the fan is self-custody Bitcoin or gold and silver. But because of the confiscatability of gold and silver, and we've seen that throughout time, right? Bitcoin to me was a better investment. That's the way I viewed it. And at some point, more and more people in the world will view it that way. And no, IBIT will not protect you, and no IBIT options will not protect you, and Deribit won't protect you, and MicroStrategy won't protect you. But if you self-custody Bitcoin and you can figure out, the radical responsibility, as G Money said, of self-custody, and we see now, through the events of the last week, that it is radical responsibility, right? Then you can protect your wealth. And that's the way I view it. And you can call me a doomer or you can call me a prepper. Okay, I call myself the guy who's in the burning building saying, get out of the fucking building. Now, if that guy's a doomer, okay, fine. To me, the doomer is the guy who's in the burning building telling everybody, sit down, chill out, relax, the fire department's on the way.
I agree, man. I wouldn't call you a doomer. I know we felt that this could go for a long time. We felt it could go anytime.
Brandon, welcome up here. Also see Jetty Weddy if you're not available, Brandon.
Yeah, no, it's great to see all of you, and appreciate the work that many of you have been doing for a long time now, but especially the last week. So it's good to see everybody. Yeah, I mean, this talk of transitioning a system is very interesting. I'm curious to see if anybody, even listening, or Dark or Terrence or anybody, how much have you heard of the American system, the Hamilton Clay system? And you guys were mentioning Bessent earlier. Because for me personally, like you said, Dark, I mean, for the last 20 years studying these things, you kind of come across some of these things, but I really, until the last 6 months, had not put some of these things together. You kind of see them all in like silos at times, and in not a vacuum, but just these different areas. And then over the last few months, watching what they were doing, really after the Venezuela thing, uh, was really fascinating to me. And really going back, I hadn't been paying attention to the political stuff necessarily, like what every single one of these guys was saying, but getting back into that, because I think a couple things can be true. I think that there's this world that we live in where how do you transfer a world? How do you go from this old system, this fiat system, to this Bitcoin system? And obviously, as we know, all of us, it's not going to happen overnight. We wish it could, but how do you transfer? And part of that answer, Dark, and what you guys were saying earlier too, is, yeah, I mean, there's people at the top that think we're useless leaders, and you can go back in history and the Malthusians, and just watch what they say, read what they've written, and they want to call the world. So there's part of that, and maybe Trump's part of that, maybe he's not. But there's also something that we can definitely say too, that they've been talking about, whether it's Bessent or Rubio, Vance, all these guys, they've been talking about the American Clay Hamilton system of tariffs, protecting sovereignty of the United States, trade, what each government should be sovereign over their own doing, their own borders, et cetera, et cetera. And I just for the last 6 months have been going down this rabbit hole and putting all those things together and really going back and seeing what they're saying. And it's been fascinating to me, to be totally honest. I've changed just in the sense of 6 months ago. I was like, what the hell are we doing? Like literally what the F is going on? And I've changed a fair amount over the last 6 months and seeing at least what they're saying and then what's happening, taking out energy choke points, taking the city of London, the crown, which is really goes back to the East India Company, obviously the last 400 years, central banking, all these things. And it's been fascinating to me the lack of knowledge with Bitcoiners of all of this. And I've seen no one talk about this over the years, and I've seen really no one talk about the last 6 months. It's just been, hey, why are we at war? Why are we at war? Which I'm one of those people too. I don't want war. None of us want war, but it's been, I'll just say, interesting. The lack of maybe paying attention to what's actually being said and what's actually being done, and going back to the crown. And it's no one's fault. It's like I was in that camp too, and so that's where whether it's custody stuff or going back to how do we transition these systems over time. And hey, pragmatically speaking, this is where we're at. And then visionary, I think the Bitcoiner in all of us and why we Bitcoin is the visionary aspect of this is the vision casting. This is the future casting of where I want to go, where we're going. I'm putting my time and energy and my money is here. And that's my vote there. But then also in this system, being pragmatically, just pragmatically speaking, like to be totally honest, I think Trump, in my opinion, I think there's a chance they're booting these midterm elections, and they're going. It's a 4-year play, and it's the tariffs. It's all these things going on to bring back, because like what you were saying, Dark, is why are we spending money overseas in these wars and these things that are happening? But if you're hollowing things out, or you've been hollowed out here in America, which if you go back, obviously with Trump for decades, has been saying that very thing, China, 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 they're hollowing us out. And he's basically playing everything he's said, generally speaking. Obviously, we can get into nuance and detail of that, but generally speaking, he's kind of doing his playbook. And the Hamilton Clay system, what they all talk about, basically every president that has tried to institute this system has got shot and or killed. And so I think it's worth looking into of what's going on. Now, the Hamilton system obviously talks about central banking, and that was the fight, a lot of this, what was going on. Now we have Bitcoin. So the ironic part is we don't need really that part of it necessarily in the future. It's not going to go away overnight, but we have Bitcoin, which they didn't have then 200 years ago, and what they were fighting over. So it's interesting. I could talk about this for hours because it's just something for the last 6 months that I've been just kind of going down and really going back into history, going obviously all the way back to basically the Reformation, the 1500s, and then going into what was leading people over to America, the start of America, and then the fights that started over those next 150 years up to 1750, 1763, obviously, the Tea Party, all these things that were happening that led up to these things. And again, for people too we all want these things to happen overnight, but 1763 was really kind of the start of the Revolutionary War, and it didn't end until 1789. Some people might say 1791, we get the Bill of Rights. And so that's 26 years, 28 years, and if you extrapolate that out with Bitcoin, 2009, that's 2035, 2036, 2037, 2038. So it kind of gives you perspective of just life and things, not repeating, but rhyming over time. So again, just thoughts and just curious of who's gone down those rabbit holes, because again, like I said, I've seen these things over time and studying. I just had not put some of these things together, and like it or not, I that's where we are, and that's what the administration is telling us. That's what's happening. I just find it interesting that Bitcoiners have not picked up on that very much, and seeing the connections between the crown, who really, we can go into the Balfour Declaration, the Sykes-Picot, the 3 agreements they were making in the Middle East that created a bunch of the tension, the energy choke points, because the crown was there for a long time with the East India Company, obviously raping and pillaging really everyone around the world. China. This is why China and India and all these countries hate the crown and anyone associated with the crown. It's because they were raping and pillaging everyone for hundreds of years through the East India Company, which is obviously the maritime and shipping and really trafficking. And then you bring it all the way up to the top of the spiritual warfare that we're in. It's really a trafficking entity. So any sex trafficking, human trafficking, drug trafficking, that is the East India Company's. That's the paradigm that everything kind of flows through. And once you start kind of seeing that, it really changes the filter of how you're seeing things, the paradigm in which you're seeing things through. And so anyway, it's just, I'm fascinated by all of this and putting this last 450 years together. And I was just curious if anyone else had really started going down those rabbit holes and digging into it.
Brandon, I couldn't hear you for the last 9 minutes. Could you just repeat that real quick?
Hey, look, I think it's a great
For
rant,
you, Terrence.
Brandon. No, it's a great rant. But let me just point a couple things out. Over the last week, I've seen Microsoft get over $2 billion in tariffs returned. I think it was Apple that got over $2 billion in tariffs returned. I think we have a debt of over $50 billion that we have to return in tariffs because the courts ruled we couldn't even put them on. Now, when you talk about the choke points, the energy choke points, the Strait of Hormuz was open before all this started. Now it's closed. I think everybody on this space knows that we could go conquer Iran, but we don't have the political will to do it. So now we're just losing another war. And now the Strait of Hormuz is closed, right? So when we talk about the Hamilton system and we talk about returning American sovereignty and getting away from the crown, are we succeeding? Is Trump succeeding in any way? And I would argue no. Matter of fact, I would argue things have gotten worse, more dangerous. Right? I mean, I want to win, man. Believe me, I want to be with you, but it's not working. And he's going to be gone in
Yeah,
two and a
well,
half years. Like we're gonna be in a lot bigger trouble. Look at what's I tweeted the other day. Is anybody surprised that the Democratic Socialists, which are an offspring of the Nazi Party, are taking over in the United States? Like, is anyone really surprised? Like, all of the conditions which led to the Nazis are starting to manifest themselves here in the United States.
well, look, power tends to centralize. You guys are making an enormous assumption. Julian Assange talks about this. Edward Snowden talks about this. Since, post World War II, the goal of war is not to win war. The goal of war is to launder money from the American taxpayers into the corporations. That's the goal. That's why they spent $1 trillion or $2 trillion in Afghanistan, and they still lost to a bunch of goat shepherds because the goal was never to win. You're seeing this in Ukraine. You're going to see this in Iran. Every conflict, they have no intention to. They could wipe out any nation in a matter of hours. You saw this during the Gulf War. I mean, it is that easy. So just be aware of the assumptions you're making. You have to acknowledge that at the very top, at the very tippity top, there's no such thing as left or right, blue or red, conservative, liberal. There's no such thing. They're all on the same team, and that team is exploit everyone and everything for power and money. That's it. And once you can make that hurdle, it's easy to draw these conclusions. Everything else.
All right.
That's
So
my point.
how about a little bit of hopium here, guys? So like Trump wouldn't be alive, the Bitcoin network wouldn't be around. None of this would be happening if the bad guys were in full control. Okay, full stop. Secondly, it has been well known, well documented for our entire history that the military has intervened with currency creation to help war-torn areas, to support allies, to support other different kinds of people in ongoing war efforts to not let total economies collapse. Okay. And so what I think we're seeing is like a controlled implosion, right? Kind of like World Trade Center 7, which, we still have no evidence of like how that thing fell down. But, like we are in a transitionary period where the Clarity Act, the Genius Act, all that stuff is going to get transitioned so that the banks hopefully can dehypothecate instead of rehypothecate, right? Tokenization, showing collateralized assets. And so making our banks health. Now, I don't know if we're going to get a total collapse or we're going to slowly rejuvenate the system. That's why I don't hold any of my, wealth in that system or a very small portion of it. But I think we need to see that these major pillars that are moving behind the scenes over a long period of time, like it's happening at a pretty quick pace, but it seems like it's taking forever because we're so zoomed in on the issues. And to think like this hasn't been played out in some sort of military AI game strategy on the long game is kind of like ludicrous, I think. Like let's not be so reactionary and zoomed in on what's exactly happening over today or the last week. But like this has been played out and thought out over a long period of time. And that Trump is not your ordinary president. Okay. Trump didn't need to run. He was a billionaire. He had plenty of money. He didn't need to do any of this stuff. And America needs Bitcoin the least, quite frankly. So why is the only, the most powerful person in the world pushing a system that ultimately will make his power actually decline in the future? And so, uh, think about that side too.
When
Okay, I've
I
thought about
usually
this.
have questions about this stuff, I ask my buddy Dom. He explains it
Yeah.
in simple terms.
Look.
I've thought about this. You know, I have seen posts that
Wait,
Oh
you don't sound like
which
Dom,
I think
Jetty
is
Weddy. We'll come back to you in
damn.
a sec. Yeah, I don't know
Well,
what's going
my
on.
point's
Every
quick. My
time,
point's really
Dom,
quick.
every
Listen,
time.
the East India Company and Brandon Gentile, he has a ton of good takes politically. But a couple of years ago, his real talent is in defensively checking people on the ice against the glass. And I told him a couple of years ago, you should start a like kind of like cold storage auditing defense company. Call it like, ice checker, something like that, because and I think it's right now shows more value than ever where he could have some developers that basically check you up against the glass and they check your whole setup and they basically try to, wreck you NHL style. But checking, your Bitcoin setup, all that stuff. So I know he's off the space. Hopefully he's still listening, but I think this is still a viable and pursuable business idea. And Brandon, I owe you a DM back because we got to get on a. We can talk about this if you're willing on like a space or something.
Well, he's
I
here.
love
He's
it.
out of the penalty box.
No, my Wi-Fi is just all over the place. So yeah, I had to bounce right after that rant. I heard some of what Dark said, but yeah, no, Dom, great. That's a great. Yeah, like you said, look at that Bitcoiner future casting right there coming to fruition. Not even a couple years later, Dom. So great call on that. I should have started that company a while ago. Yeah, no, great thoughts by everybody, Dark, everything, and that's what's so tough about all of it is two things can be true, and that's where I hate the fucking government-run school system as much as the next guy, and a product of 16, 20 years of that nonsense, and conform, comply, obey, conform, comply, obey. That's what you're taught, right? So the problem is 100 things can be true, right? 10 things can be true, 2 things can be true. It's not just one right answer, and that's why it's so tough because there's so many of these different things going on. Like, does the WHO want most of us gone? Does the Crown want most of us gone because they believe it should be a couple million of us alive and that's it? Yeah, of course. The Malthusians, the Club of Rome, those types. And at the same time, is Trump on his own agenda doing whatever and who knows what? Yeah. Is he eluding the system? Yeah, because someone had mentioned or kind of alluded to Frederick Bastiat earlier, right? Plunder, when plunder becomes a way of life. So are we all those times at the head, the fourth turning, the cliche, that we all hear? Yeah, of course, and that's what I think makes it really hard. I remember my father a few years ago, maybe during COVID, he's just like, "Man, you read about this shit in history, your whole life, but it just sucks to have to live through it." And it's just like the most generic comment, but it's probably the truest comment, and the one I think about all the time. Of we're just living through these historical times of craziness happening, all these turnings, all happening at the same time, and you can only work with what you've been given, the information you've been given. So that's why we're all here, and that's where Bitcoin trying to reorient the architecture of society is so important. It is the end all be all. It's obviously the highest form of communication that we have. So that's why we all fight. But I don't know. It's fascinating to see how this is going to play out. And to your side, Dark, what you were saying, like the tariff stuff, and that's what I think is really hard because you can't round peg square hole this, right? Like you said, 200 years ago, they're implementing a system. The American system was there to try to protect a small country, right? It's a burgeoning country. Well, now it's very different, right? We're an imperial empire, a revolutionary force, all at the same time, and that's what America oscillates back and forth between. So the play has to be a little bit different, right? The things change. Your country is very different now, and you have a world reserve currency when you didn't then. So that's why it's so fascinating and unique what we're living through, and none of us know. And that's the wild part that really I kind of think strikes at the core of all the things we're dealing with, and just trying to go through one day at a time and to figure out how do we reorient the incentives of society so that way people aren't looting things all up and down the system, and you're not incentivized to do that. So fascinating. I apologize, like I said, I couldn't hear a couple minutes in between there, but
Let's hit Blanca and then Anon.
Yeah, just reflecting on the conversation too. I think there's like a kind of a false assumption. On one hand, we say that America can't go and do these things overseas because we're too weak, but then we're also assuming that we still control the world in a way. I mean, I would offer for people to pull up a demographic chart of the world and then reconsider some of your assumptions. The Western populations are extremely aged. We have a very low population base in comparison to the rest of the world. And, I think people are living in this false illusion that we're safer than we are. And so, I would just push back on some people assuming that America can be isolated and just sit back and not do anything. Because obviously, where there's weakness, somebody will exploit it. And so, we may not want war, and that's obvious, but war may choose us. And as Americans, I think that, my position is that people should be waking up to the reality that the world is very dangerous and probably getting more dangerous, and to put our differences aside and actually reach across the aisle and shake hands and become less divided, because in the future we may need to be unified.
Anon.
Yeah, have we talked about the Bolt swap going down yet? That's a bizarre thing that has gotten almost no airtime.
I think we mentioned it, but we didn't dig into it. What do you got for us?
Yeah, it just seems very strange, the timing around it with everything that's going on. They said that they were receiving an unprecedented amount of attacks. They weren't really specific about what those attacks are. But the idea that they've shut it down indefinitely, and it's so heavily ingrained in so many different things, like the Albi app and the Albi hub, and I'm using it for my app.
Aqua, yeah.
Tons of wallets. Like I think Bull Bitcoin, Mana. Like you said,
well, isn't all of this related to the Kimi model AI that was released? That's like finding flaws in just about everything right now.
Yes, I believe it is. And I think they also said that they don't have the capacity with tech staff to be able to support everything.
I mean, that is the right response, right? Like versus
is.
what happened with Cold Card. Stop, shut it down, reevaluate. What do we need to figure out, right? Because how can three guys in a garage compete with an AI model?
Yeah, I don't know how big their team is. Is it just 3 guys?
Well, no,
I think they said it was like 10.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is non-custodial, but still, if it's you're plugging, that's the thing. It's all this open source stuff that's getting attacked, and in a weird, ironic way, the closed source stuff is somewhat safe. You have to trust that company, but it's cordoned off.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to be watching it. I mean, I just find it very suspicious when non-custodial ways to switch money in and out of Lightning to BTC start drying up. I'm going to start raising an eyebrow.
Yeah, well, it's scary, and it's good to know. I mean, I've used the Bolt swaps many times on both Mana and Aqua because I would use it for privacy. If I would have to send Bitcoin somewhere, I would always first swap it. I'd swap it into liquid Bitcoin, and then I'd swap it back. And so I've depegged and removed my history. But imagine while you're sitting in that swap, which sometimes can be up to 24 hours, it gets pulled from a hack, just like this Cold Card thing. So that would be scary. I mean, even though hopefully you're just doing small amounts at a time, but still.
Bitcoin Anon, is he still here? Oh yeah, he is. Okay. I just put something in the nest. I'm sure you probably saw this. I was wondering if you could speak to that a bit.
1 second, I'm looking for it. Scrolling through.
All right, while you're looking at that, Anon, let's go to Tico. Tico, did you have your hand up?
It's the Beef for Bacon post. He was quote tweeting Chris Goida.
Beef for bacon.
Beef for bacon? What does that mean? You're giving someone beef and you get bacon in return? That sounds like a gist.
I'm not seeing it. I'm seeing the last post I see is G Money's from Zach Herbert, and the first one I see is there it just came up. Let me see what it says. Excited to see shitcoiners finally fork off from Chris Guida. Seems like many miners still aren't getting the message that we need them to signal readiness for BIP-110 now to prevent forcing everyone.
Well, the shitcoiners are safe because they didn't have Cold Card.
So I've rebased Luke's 2017 POW change hard fork code into the recent version of Knots. I think we should have this in our back pocket in case miners decide to collude to betray Bitcoin. What do you guys think? You want me to address it? Like, what do you want me to say? Like, they're going forward with a proof of work change, it sounds like?
Yeah, just curious what your thoughts are on that. Is this something that you would expect to see?
I mean, I think it was threatened in the past. Mechanic was on his podcast talking about, like, if the nuclear option needs to be on the table, it needs to be on the table. And that's what it sounds like they're going to do. I mean, what are my personal thoughts about it? I'm not technical enough to get into what that means for what happens during a fork split. I have no idea. Is it my movement? No, I've been supporting BIP-110 for cultural reasons because I support the ethos behind it. I think it's important to shake out a lot of the corruption in the industry, and so I've been happy with the results of 20% of the network switching over to knots. I love that. I love all the muckraking going on around funding and people getting exposed for the weird nepotism and DEI crap. So overall, I'm happy with what's happened with the movement. I can't speak to proof of work changes. I don't understand them enough.
This is what they have threatened as the move to fire the miners. So, right, just to be very clear for anyone listening, this would be an attempt to render all mining machines useless. It is an explicit attack on the mining industry if they fail to go along with the soft fork. So it's the next level up in intensity. It's a proposed hard fork to change proof of work to
You mean
make
something
ASIC
outside of
miners.
SHA-256, something entirely different?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
It's the burning of the boats move.
If you don't come along with us, we will propose a proof of work change, which will make your entire mining infrastructure, your mining machines, your ASICs useless. That's what this is.
Useless on the minority chain, not useless for the
Correct.
legacy chain that just continues
Useless on.
Correct.
It's useless on knots, right? Like this is for knots.
It's a hard
No,
fork. It's a
not
hard fork
knots.
shitcoin.
Oh, okay.
Not knots, humble. Not knots is a implementation software for Bitcoin. BIP-110 is a proposal of consensus rules that's about to activate in 4 days or so. And so you could be running knots and not be enforcing BIP-110. But if you are enforcing BIP-110, whether you're running knots or some other implementation that's enforcing it, you will reject any new blocks that are not signaling for BIP-110 at the start of the mandatory signaling period here in a few days. And as soon as that happens, there's a fork. And if the majority of hash power that is out there does not start signaling, then there will most likely be a perpetual fork that continues on until all of the hash power that's on that minority fork leaves and defects back, and then it just kind of dies out. Or they do something like this burn the boats tactic of a proof of work change difficulty adjustment to be able to get. But they're basically just like completely breaking ties. It's like saying, okay, the soft fork failed, now we have to hard fork. And then the rhetoric that I expect, if that does happen, is this is the real Bitcoin, and all the miners need to, it's basically a framing battle at that point, because you need to start convincing people to come over and sell their BTC for BIP-110 coin.
Hey Trey, if you're a miner, why would you not wait until Flag Day and not let your competitors know and not have any of your blocks rejected? Why would you not switch to 110 if you're a miner?
Well, if you okay, so there's two different time frames here to consider, right? So like the first is before, like during this period of voluntary signaling, there's no cost to signaling. But some people have made the argument that if you signal too early, then you open yourself up to criticism, and it's kind of like bringing unnecessary heat on you, even if you do intend to start signaling. So you might as well just wait until the last minute and not bring that heat on you, which is kind of strange to me because according to BIP-110 proponents, it already has consensus. So I don't know why there'd be so much heat. The reason to signal early is that it's actually not as like simple as just flipping the bit. A lot of these mining operations are very big companies. They've got like systems integrations. There's software that you need to test, and you need to like make sure that it's going to work and that you're not going to accidentally fork yourself off by just flipping the bit.
But couldn't they be doing that right now behind the scenes without going live? I mean, that doesn't seem
I mean,
difficult.
there could be some like maybe on testnet they could be testing it, something like that. But my point is that it's not as simple as just flip the bit and everything's good, and it's just like a quick like configuration change in whatever software you're running. You also, if you decide to flip the bit and you choose wrong, and that's the wrong choice, wrong, I'm saying wrong in the way of like where the network ends up landing in terms of majority hash power, you have real cost of doing that after mandatory signaling starts. So there's no cost to doing it now, which, in a lot of ways you would think, well, if there's no cost, then you might as well signal for it now, if you intend on supporting it. If you don't intend on supporting it, then you could just safely ignore it. But it helps to coordinate the activities across different miners if they know what their competition is going to do, kind of, right? Because if you choose to signal and you end up on the minority fork, you are now expending work on that minority fork chain that could otherwise be expended on the legacy chain that probably has a better chance of winning this hash rate. So you do have to choose at the start of mandatory signaling. And if you choose incorrectly, you are burning money, essentially.
Yeah, so you don't buy into the narrative that a lot of these miners are going to flip, but they're just waiting till the last minute. That just doesn't make sense to you, or you just think it's unlikely.
I think it's extremely unlikely. I think that in all past instances, like there's at least 20-30% of signaling that was happening leading into forks that actually had consensus. I think that these are like multi-$100 million, billion-dollar businesses that are out there running mining operations, and that this is the kind of thing that they don't take lightly, that they would be like very much not flippant about, right? And so it's if I'm sitting in their shoes, and I could be completely wrong about this, so this is just conjecture, but like it doesn't make sense to me that you would just wait until the last minute just to see what other miners are going to do. Like you would start signaling now at the very least. And even like if you look at that at the thread that B for Bitcoin is pointing to, I kind of commented there. What did I say? Oh, it was I said, I thought it makes no sense for them to signal early. Heard this many times because Chris Guida said, it seems like many miners still aren't getting the message, right? And he responded to me and said, we are way past early. And I just said, I would think so. So it looks like some of the leaders of BIP-110 are starting to get a little bit nervous about the lack of signaling. And I think that makes a lot of sense. The hard fork talk is the consistent and logical solution based on the way that a lot of these people have been talking, which is that the legacy chain is invalid, that it's nothing but spam and CSAM. And in order to be like morally consistent or intellectually consistent, I would think like you kind of have to follow through once you put that rhetoric out there in the space. It's kind of hard to just be like, okay, well, we failed, so we're going back to the drawing board and accepting that this totally unacceptable chain is something that we can continue to use.
When are we activating again? Like 4 days from now? Mandatory
Yeah,
signaling?
it is. I've got a little
It's the
dashboard out there
6th,
that tracks
isn't it?
this.
It's the 8th or the 9th is the last I heard. But
Oh,
It's
okay.
Yeah, it's going
it
to be
is
over the weekend, I think.
It's August 8th, which is Saturday. Right now, somewhere in the early afternoon, my dashboard is saying 2:27 p.m. Eastern time, 4 days and 1 hour. But that can shift obviously as hash power, as the timing of blocks comes in unevenly. But it's going to be sometime on August 8th. Looks like in the early afternoon, early to mid afternoon. 586 blocks to go. There's a total of 2.66% of blocks that have come in this last voluntary period that have signaled for BIP-110. 38 out of 1,431. And if you look back over the rolling last 2016 blocks, which is a full difficulty period, there's been a total of 52 signaling, which is 2.58%. So that's about how much hash power is out there that is currently signaling for BIP-110. A couple of other comments, and I'll bring it back to the group. There are two main, I don't know if you call them pools or operators out there. One's called Roughnecks and one's called SOV. And they, between the two of them, have 67% of the hash power that has been signaling for BIP-110. And these are, as I understand them, they are
Rented
places where
hash.
you can, it's rented hash. So you
Yeah.
can rent hash rate. You're essentially, it's like cloud mining basically, and you just tell them where you know that you want to signal, and then that signal goes out there. So there are no major mining pools obviously that have been signaling. Probably the biggest X factor out there is this Foundry vote that they had announced a couple weeks ago, which is very strange. Honestly, if I don't know, I think it's very strange. What they had indicated was that they're going to be taking a poll or a vote from the miners who were Foundry customers, or pointing their hash at Foundry based on hash rate, like weighted toward hash rate, to say, do you support BIP-110 or not? And if like 51% supports it, then they will signal all of their blocks. And if it's less than that, then they won't. The default vote is no. And that they said that as soon as it got to a majority, they would start signaling. So assuming they're following through on what they had stated in that, so far, it seems like the indication is that they have not received a majority of voting in support of that, because they have not started signaling.
Let's say the majority of the mining are pools. So you've got all these independent miners and people pointing their hash to the pool. So they're not building their own blocks. They're not using, Stratum or Datum or whatever. And let's pretend they all are for 110 and they're all going to switch right at that moment. They would have to be pointing over to Ocean or somewhere, and they'd have to just immediately within minutes just change the address. I mean, they just point, because isn't the majority of this pools rather than mining companies, or do I have that backwards?
Yeah, I think that's right. And if anybody else, has a little more detailed understanding of this, please jump in. But to your point about like how quickly do they have to do this? Well, again, as soon as a non-signaling block is mined, that's when the network splits. And that's when people basically have to choose. And you got to be pretty quick about this. Within, like, if the first 10 blocks come in non-signaling, BIP-110 is dead, because there will already have been enough work done on previous blocks that the people who mined those blocks, in order to then start signaling, they would have to give up all of the rewards that they earned from mining those blocks, in order to start pointing at a minority chain and hope that that minority chain catches up by receiving other hash rate from other miners who decide to start signaling. So like the decision, I think, the quote unquote decision, the resolution to this fork is going to happen within the first 100 blocks for sure, I would think. Probably within the first 10 to 25. Now that could change. That my perspective or prospectus on this could change if in the next couple of days Foundry comes out and they start pointing their 30% of hash power signaling for BIP-110. Like if you start getting into now, all of a sudden there's some bigger players coming in and signaling 10% of hash rate, 20%, 30%, 40%. At that point, it becomes much more of a coin toss as to which way this is going to go. And that's if you start getting into the 30 to 50% range leading into this, that's when things may get a little more chaotic.
It's also
At the time that it actually happens.
it's also interesting that this hack happened right before this. And Trey, not sure if you know about this or a question on it. If they start moving that Bitcoin through BIP-110 nodes and putting like economic weight of that stolen Bitcoin through the different protocol, would that have an effect? Do you know?
Well, it again, this kind of comes down to how much hash rate is on each chain and how quickly blocks are coming through. Like imagine you so let's say that the attackers are sitting on all of this Bitcoin that they just stole. At the time of the split, they're going to have Bitcoin on both chains. And so there's no replay protection. So that's maybe a technical rabbit hole we don't need to go down. But let's just say that they can safely move each one of them independently. They're still going to have to contend with the time frame of the minority chain of the BIP-110 chain, assuming it remains the minority, for blocks coming in. So like in the last, like at the current hash rate, you're only getting like 3.5 blocks per day on average, which means that it's going to take a long time between each block in order to get your transactions through as you're trying to move money on the BIP-110 side of things. And that is going just projecting out the same amount of hash rate. If it were to last this long, it would take over a year and a half before the first difficulty adjustment to bring the block time down closer to 10 minutes like it should be. I don't expect that things are going to obviously they're not going to remain static over that period of time. But there's a whole lot of other dynamics at play around fees that might build up and that kind of thing. Maybe we don't need to go down that rabbit hole yet.
Hey, Trey, Gary here. What's the motivation for these players in the next 2 days to try to shift the vote? Who gets what for doing what, and how risky is it?
Well, the risk lies in choosing the wrong chain to point your hash rate to. So it's kind of like a Mexican standoff where you're like, you want to go with the majority as a miner, I would think. Like most miners are kind of just economically motivated. So you want to go where everybody else is going. So far, nobody has gone first. So if you're looking around at the other miners and the other pools, you're kind of waiting for somebody else to take the first move so that you can have comfort or confidence that you're not going to be the only one. Because if you're the only one, then you end up on a minority chain and you've wasted a bunch of work and burned a bunch of money.
Yeah, but we know the public companies will vote for sanity, right? I mean, they're not going to. Correct. I mean, we do know who's going to
if you
go.
ask BIP-110 proponents, they would say no. They will follow the BIP-110 fork and enforce it because they don't want to alienate what they refer to as 15% of the network, which is not at all actually the case, I don't think. But they're like, well, we could just keep 100% of transaction fees and economic activity that we're mining for, or we could split off and only keep 85%. Well, of course we're going to do 100%, but that has a whole bunch of built-in assumptions that I don't think are correct.
And for like a Foundry, what's the benefit? Why would they do that? Is there some political stuff going on that it's not apparent to me, or is there incentives.
I
Well, Foundry's letting their miners choose.
so
The Foundry's doing the vote, like we were saying earlier, which I'm glad they're doing, because then we can really see whether or not, you know, these mining pools are making all the decisions. You know, if the largest or second largest mining pool is allowing their miners to decide and they don't activate for it, then this concept that mining pools are centralizing mining in a capacity that is preventing this BIP going forward, that narrative is entirely false in my eyes. So the vote is important for, in my opinion.
yeah, I mean, Gary, we kind of like, this is a first, right? Like, we haven't had this type of a soft fork in the past where there's been this kind of like very strong-willed minority, what seems to be a minority that claims they're the majority, but seems to be the minority, that has essentially um, pulled the pin on the grenade, and we're just waiting to see what the fallout is going to be in 4 days. And so, if I'm sitting in the seats of these large companies, as you seem to be implying, I'm thinking, well, it looks like there's not consensus. Nobody else is signaling. We're not ready for this. If there is a fork, there's no exchanges that are set up to
Yeah.
actually be able to provide economic trading between these two and figure out an economic market. Like, we're just going to not do anything. And by not doing anything, you can be very confident that you're going to remain with the economic majority.
How does it come into play? Say if I'm hashing to Foundry, right, and they decide they get their 51%, and they start signaling, and I wasn't a part of that 51%, and I decided to move my hash rate to F2 pool or Luxor or Brains. How would that affect the whole signaling process
Yeah, that's a
percentage?
good point. It's
Because a lot
fairly
of people
trivial.
could choose where they want to point their hash rate, right?
Yeah, it's fairly trivial to do that. I imagine it's more complex for larger miners than it is for like somebody who's got a couple of ASICs in their basement, right? Like, I've done that in the past, and it's very easy to just point it at different pools. But you're right to point that out. That, yeah, if the minority of Foundry moves their hash rate, if Foundry votes for BIP-110 and then the minority in that vote decides they're going to point their hash rate away from Foundry and toward another pool that's not signaling for it, then that would obviously bring the weight of the hash rate or the weight of the signaling that Foundry is able to provide down by quite a bit, right? Like, let's say it's half of those people, then maybe only 15% of whatever's running through Foundry currently is actually pointing toward 110 as opposed to the other. Again, this is like all fluid. It's a fluid and dynamic situation that has a whole bunch of caveats and assumptions built into it. It seems to be the safe play for most people is what they've already been doing, which is just essentially safely ignoring it.
Imagine renting another man's hash. Just imagine.
Well,
That's
all
like the
the
most
signal,
self-sovereign Bitcoin ethos-y thing I've ever heard.
all the signaling for BIP 110 right now, I believe, is all from rented hash rate right now currently.
Yeah,
We have a first mover, and it's a bunch of retarded plebs renting another
Wait, come
man's
on. This is
hash.
this
That's
is
our first mover,
hyperbole.
Trey. You said there's no first mover. It's a tiny cohort of retarded plebs that have no previous experience mining, renting another man's
There's a lot of
hash.
people
There's a
renting
lot of
hash,
work that
no
goes into
doubt,
that,
but there's
Mars.
also a bunch of companies doing it. There's Roughneck, there's
Who?
Westmont Fabrics, there's the SOV
Who are they?
guys. I mean, a lot of them are small companies.
What's my
It's just a
fabrics?
New
Who's that?
York fabric company.
well,
It's
Anon,
like
yeah, I was pointing
it's
out
just
that,
like
like,
pay to play, right?
Notable.
It's just pay to play.
yeah, and Anon, I was pointing out earlier, I mean, you may have missed it, that out of all of the BIP 110 signaling blocks over the, like, since signaling became available, 67% of them have been done by either roughnecks or SOV, which,
Yeah,
as
yeah, I
in
agree
my
with that.
understanding, are all they are rented hash operations. Like they're providing the service of being able to rent hash. They're leasers. They're lesser. They're leasing hash. I don't know.
I thought that Roughnecks was its own operation. I didn't think they were renting.
It's rented.
I believe it's rented.
I'd have to check on that. Okay.
I thought renting hash was when you rented an Airbnb and brought your 40 ASICs in and plugged them in.
That's
Anon,
it,
it's kind
bro.
of worse if it's not rented, right? Like if it's not rented, it means that this one company controls 40% of the hash rate on a minority chain, potential minority chain.
I wonder how it's going to work because there's only so much you could rent, right? And they obviously they rent hash rate, so like brains as well, they rent hash rate. So you got normal people just renting it. So I feel like I wonder what the demand's going to be at that point of them everybody trying to rent hash rate different ways. It's going to be a little crazy for
Yeah, I
these
mean,
companies.
right now, like if you're already mining, you're choosing where you want to point your hash rate, and if you want to signal for BIP-110, then maybe you're pointing it at, or you're renting from Roughnecks, or you're pointing at Ocean, and there's no cost to doing that above and beyond what your normal costs are for mining, because we're all on the same boat rowing in the same direction. But as soon as mandatory signaling starts, that's when there does become an actual a cost to making the wrong decision.
People said, what are the miners' concerns here? I mean, one of the other things to consider, well, if I was a miner, I would consider it, is not just, I think the fork, honestly, if it happened, like let's say 110 became adopted, will it really decrease mining revenues or really affect that in any serious way, outside of the fact that it might cause like tumultuous things in the market with, exchanges having to reflow, like which they're selling and stuff like that. So there'd be temporary disruptions, but at its core, like technically at the transaction level, I don't think it would change much for them. But I would imagine I'd be very weary as a miner for sort of de facto electing Luke as the new, there's no like CEO of Bitcoin or anything or anything like that, but like a very influential steward dev that effectively would then have the reins. Because you got to imagine if you're a core dev sitting there and you're like, oh, wow, okay, so like they just effectively seized the gravity of development and check-ins and reference implementation, everything over there. They're going to have to kowtow quite a bit to that, and so would everyone else if that really becomes the predominant implementation. And given how unstable Luke is, if you're a business person and you're like, okay, there's this dude that wore a gas mask and like talks about eating cats and like has weird proposals like every other day. Like, am I going to put him in an elevated position to potentially direct the technical direction of my business, or am I gonna like stick with something more stable? That would honestly be one of my biggest considerations if I was one of these miners. Get all things being equal, it was just like, well, who do I want to elevate in the community? And I wouldn't choose an element of instability like that.
And then
especially knowing
wouldn't Core just adopt 110 and then there wouldn't be that risk?
No, I mean, because I almost feel like it's almost like it'd be a self-fulfilling prophecy that this thing continues, because you get a lot of mixed messages. Like their idea is to stop spam. Well, we know 110 doesn't do that. Even though I got Mechanic on a space, I think it was maybe one of these ones, to say, we're not going to continue forking to chase it. Well, what the hell is your narrative worth then? If you're going to put out one shot that doesn't do what you said, and then you're not going to continue. Like, we know that they're not going to stop spamming. So are you implicitly buying into a fork regime where now you're almost, you let them do it once and you kind of kowtow to it? You're almost in the car for the full duration of the trip. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I asked him, I think was it on this venue here, like on Bitcoin Today? I was like, it would be really helpful if we could start to get some semblance of an understanding of what the plan is after BIP-110 activates successfully on Bitcoin. what happens over the next year? What does the post BIP-110 regime look like? Because for anybody who's not familiar with this, BIP-110 is a temporary soft fork. It rolls back automatically after a year. A year is not all that long of time. So there's got to be like
Wow, that's
some.
amazing. This is the first time I've heard this.
So
All of this for a temporary fix.
Gary. So
Well,
Gary,
not
Yeah.
just temporary. They'll probably try to
Well,
make
it's
it
triggering.
permanent at the end of a year in some way, but all it ensures for 100% is that we are going to be haggling about this for at least 12 more months after it occurred. At least. So
yeah.
if you didn't like all of this bullshit in these spaces, yeah, you would want to vote against this, because we're just going to continue to have
Yeah.
spaces where we talk about these people for 12 more months. Well,
And
I love
look,
dunking on them.
my point is
Gets
like,
old.
look, if the current state of things is unacceptable and we have to change consensus rules in order to address it, then a rollback to the current state of things is also unacceptable. So there's got to be some like plan for what comes next. Fine if it's temporary, I guess. I mean, I think this is
Trey,
very,
I
very
think they
weird,
are.
but
I swear to God, I think they're the dog who might catch the car. Not might. I don't think it's probable this occurs, but I think if it happened, they'd be the dog who caught the car. Like, didn't fucking think they were going to do it. They're running down the street. You know, this car should be going like a solid 40 miles an hour, but for some reason it's having trouble. And they're attached to the bumper like a pit bull. And like, what the fuck? What am I doing here?
now
Like,
what do I do, right? Yeah.
Well, David,
exactly.
going back to
That's
what you said, though, if in that hypothetical where Luke is the de facto lead dev or whatever you want to call it, you really think that core would just not say, let's adopt 110 so we have a seat at the table? They would just throw
Core
away
doesn't.
all of their
So
seat at the table just because
so here's
what?
the thing. Like core does not need to adopt 110, and this is part of what BIP-110 proponents will echo very loud and clear, is that it is a soft fork, which means you don't actually have to upgrade your node. It is backwards compatible, which means if you're running a core node, any version of core, and BIP-110 activates successfully, it's got enough hash power to enforce it on Bitcoin itself, then core nodes are none the wiser, essentially, right? They're just seeing blocks that are full of BIP-110 compliant transactions, which are already compliant with the consensus rules that they know to follow. And they just won't see any of these other transactions
Well, Trey,
that.
here's another angle. If you would say, let's play the game theory out, because we actually have a contradicting proposition that's already occurred, right? So if you say like, hey, well, to retain their position in the dev hierarchy, I guess, or whatever you want. If you don't like centralized stuff, not a hierarchy, why don't we just pull this in and we'll kind of try to paper over it? Let's just squash it because we don't want the other outcome where he's sort of more in control. You could say, well, yeah, well, wouldn't they do that just to put this to bed and make it all quiet? Well, one would say, well, why would they not listened to them in the beginning and not change the filter settings, right? But they did that anyway. So I think there's a precedence here for core probably wouldn't kowtow to something that is much more disastrous than these silly filter changes. So I would say I'd look in. Unlike investments, I would look at past behavior to to predict future behavior, and think that they wouldn't do that just out of like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's like admitting weakness or admitting that
It's
we're
like going to
wrong from
war
the
with
beginning.
Iran and then you taco like 17 times and you don't fuck them up. Like that's kind of what's going on.
But
really.
then by doing that through their
good thing that
actions,
doesn't
they're
happen in
saying
the
it
real
wasn't
world.
a concern. Either Luke is a concern or he isn't. And if your actions say that you're not going to do that because he's not a concern, then it was never a concern. It's a which concern is greater.
What? What does that
Meaning,
mean?
is your concern larger that Luke is the supposed lead dev at that point, or that you want a seat at the table? Like, which is more important to you at that point? Do you want to?
I think right now I don't think they're incentivized to act at all, just like the miners aren't, because there's no signal that there's really any
in the
teeth back
hypothetical, not
behind
right
it.
now. I agree, but in the hypothetical you raised.
I I mean, I don't know that. I think after you, I think a lot of it would end up being more of who is the one driving change versus which repo is it being checked into. Like, if you are taking, it's like if you're taking that change in and it's basically been forced upon you, you're still really not in the driver's seat at that point. Not that core is, I mean, core, the consensus rules of Bitcoin are Bitcoin, but obviously it's the reference implementation. I think it feels a lot like the English, like the European parliaments, not so much like the US where like you can't, really unseat people beyond like the congressional terms and stuff. You know how like in the European area, they just like ditch their governments like every like couple of years, or just someone does something bad and they're all voted out. It's just so dynamic. I think it's sort of like that. It's like a sentiment thing. Like you can't just say, oh, we'll pulled your one change in and I know you want to do a bunch of other ones and clearly the market's fully behind you. But now we're going to go back to the paradigm of like, we're just going to not pay attention to you and we're going to continue doing things you don't like. So I feel like you just lose the juice. I don't know if there's a good way to put this. Trey, maybe you're more articulate.
It's a sentimental market, I've been told.
Hey, I got a question for you, Trey or Daniel, if you can answer. So we got a signaling block, so-called date block, whatever comes first, the block, obviously, right? People start signaling, and they mine a block. At this point is when the miners have to choose. How does the lock-in date play a part into this? Because they also have a 2-week from that date, another lock-in block date. How does that play a part?
So there's a split in the chain as soon as BIP-110 nodes reject a block that is not signaling. So essentially what happens is, let's say you get to the start of mandatory signaling and the first block is not signaling for BIP-110. That block will relay to all nodes, including the BIP-110 nodes. And BIP-110 nodes will look at it and say, this block is invalid because I'm enforcing BIP-110 rules. So I'm going to throw it out. I'm not going to pay attention to it. But the rest of the nodes that are not enforcing BIP-110 will take this block and they'll validate the block, according to their consensus rules, and they'll say this is valid, and then they'll add it to the blockchain on their node. As soon as that happens, now all of a sudden, BIP-110 nodes are one block behind the legacy chain. Now, the next block, if it comes as
Yeah, I get the longest chain. The longest chain will win, right? But the lock-in date, how does that play a part? So if the longest chain is not BIP-110, or even if it is, how does the lock-in date play a part in this?
So the lock-in date,
or block, as we should say.
Yeah. So maybe I don't have a perfect understanding of this, and Daniel, if you've got a better one, but like in my mind, the lock-in date is more relevant if there's voluntary signaling that actually reached the 55% threshold. It's like, okay, we reached the 55% threshold. This thing is going to activate, and then we're going to lock in 2 weeks later. But technically speaking, BIP-110 nodes will. They're still going to be on another chain, right? They're still going to be on another chain as soon as mandatory signaling starts and there's a non-signaling block.
Anyways, BIP-110ers are retarded. I just want to state that for the record.
I'll state for the record that I fully echo and understand the concerns that they raise in a general sense. I just think there are real world trade-offs that need to be considered when we talk about a system that's operating in the real world, and that the idealized version of Bitcoin is something that is truly that, just an idealized version. And that right now, like in my mind, Bitcoin is not broke, so we shouldn't try to fix it.
Well, and it's inevitable. I mean, people have to understand, like, this is why when I went on Stephen Livera's podcast, it was like he asked me this question about, walk me through like what are the effects of these 7 consensus changes, and like how do you feel like each one's going to affect the goal that they have of like reducing this data in Bitcoin. And I was like, look, that's just the wrong way, to think about it, because it doesn't matter how many times you push and prod at these little consensus rules here and there. Let's just zoom all the way out and say you have full control to fuck up any part of Bitcoin script you want, to like, change it, to hobble it, to, reduce it. It really comes down to like, you can't get rid of public keys and hashes in Bitcoin because you need them to facilitate even the most basic transfers. So even if you blasted a hole in Bitcoin op script and remove like 90% of ops so that it could only do like one-to-one address sends, no multi-sig, no anything, just remove everything except for the most primitive thing you could possibly imagine. All it does is makes transactions that are spam transactions, instead of being tall and fat, like a lot more hashes and signatures in one transaction, it just spreads them out. It would just force them to make it horizontal, right? Like take up more atomic transactions. They can still do the data though. So like it's just not even worth, like, let's just skip to the end of the book where you get to do anything you want, but you still fail. And so don't do it. Like, just don't do it. Like it's like the first time you take heroin and then you think it's really great. And then you just chase that dragon forever until you become a sucked out fiend and die. And I just don't want to do that. Let's just avoid it. Yeah, so all you heroin users, we all can relate.
Yeah, exactly. That's what Bitcoin is heroin. Well, mostly for Luke.
Yeah, I just posted in the Nessus from Justin. I don't know if you guys saw that, but he just posted about what we were talking about, how it's going to have to be a user-activated soft fork because the miners are not signaling.
Yeah,
Isn't that what it's always
Well,
been?
yeah,
it's like
oh yeah, go ahead.
we've been like speculating about this as being kind of the natural progression of this if they don't if the leaders of this don't back down. And I think like this looks to me like, hey, we need to start figuring out how to implement this theoretical plan that we didn't think we'd have to pull out of our back pocket because we thought we were going to win. Now we got to start escalating the threats here, essentially, and putting.
But do you think they really didn't think they were going to win? I think that we started telling Chris. I remember, man, when they first started this bullshit, it was like 2.5 years ago or 2 years, something like that. And I was like, Chris, what are you talking about? These filters, they already don't work. It doesn't matter what core does. You're gonna have to fork. Like you have to soft fork.
I remember, posting something about like, the inevitable outcome of this is a fork of some kind, right?
And they knew it, and they can't be. Look, they are either very stupid, which I suppose there's, I want to be inclined to say they're not, but maybe there's a percentage chance. They're either incredibly stupid, like the stupidest people alive, who couldn't see the handwriting on the wall right when the signaling started. You know what I mean? Or they knew, like the close knit people, Dathan Ohm or Chris or whoever he is, and they knew that they probably weren't going to get this thing, but they had already kind of telegraphed in their mind the fact that they wanted to go that route. And they had the PR, right? Luke's got that PR from back in the day, which, Chris is obviously going to upstream now. So it's like, I think they knew. I think they knew that they were going to do it. And probably like a year ago or when they first started the fork stuff. I can't believe they'd be that stupid. It's impossible.
Hey, Trey, a question for you, because I kind of agree with Mars that, it seems like the last few months it's been clear this optional portion of the miners activating it wasn't going to happen, even though at the same time the message is it's dead on arrival, even though we haven't even gotten to the block height needed yet for it to trigger. So my question for you, because I appreciate your take, you're usually pretty good, like I mentioned in the post, you separate facts and probabilities from your opinion, and it's pretty clear, so you don't mix the two. The discussion around rented hash rate doesn't seem to be something I hear a lot of I guess we're calling the leaders of BIP-110 talk about, because there's really no mathematical way to force activation to be successful through rented hash rate. So whether whether SOV or rough mix or renting, the goal for that to happen has always been to have the 5 big mining pools flip.
Is that a good way to say that the rented hash rate is just kind of a
Yeah.
non-conversation
Oh,
point?
absolutely. Like, I don't. So I don't know how it would be possible to rent enough hash to get to 55%. I don't think that's at all possible. I think that the idea behind rented hash is, hey, we need to like start having some hash rate signal, and the more rented hash that we have that is signaling, the more pressure we will hopefully put on the larger players that need to actually flip in order for things to go our way. So
it's a total juke move. It's just a juke move to try to
you're trying.
convince other people that there's forward motion. That's it.
Correct.
It's like Shaquille O'Neal like juking before he takes like a free throw shot. Like you all know that motherfucker's bricking every shot, but he's just going to do like one head fake just to keep everyone.
It kind of reminds me of that experiment when there's a bunch of people like in a park, and then one guy just starts dancing, and then they hope for somebody else to come start dancing with them, and then eventually everybody starts dancing, but it just seems like that guy just keeps dancing by himself right now.
Yeah,
exactly. But there's no one else that's going to dance. I mean, can you imagine Luke dancing? I can imagine with his gas mask on, like if he had a cat around. I can't. He's not going to do it.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess that's why I think anytime I hear on either side people talking about rented hash rate, it's a non-issue. That's not how the movement gets to the finish line. So I guess my second question, on your opinion, there was sorry, it's been like 20 minutes since you guys are talking about it, but it was Luke Dashjr somehow controlling Bitcoin. But if the opinion that most people here disagree with, and let's say activation date, flag day comes around, F2 pool flips, then ant pool, then everybody flips, and there's no like hard fork, there's no animosity in that. We'll call it the rarest scenario possible. Luke doesn't have any extra power now over core developers, does he?
Oh, of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Can I step in real quick just to rebut Sean's comment that a rented hash doesn't really have anything to do, or whatever. Here's what I want to point out. I just posted to the Nest. It was the second tweet back. Parman, who's a major advocate for BIP-110, he's kind of like a capo in the BIP-110 community, launched a fundraiser for the victims of the cold card losses.
Yeah, and I understand that.
Using those.
And I know Lauren.
I'm not done finishing. I'm not. Sean,
agreeing.
I'm not done finishing.
I don't care. I asked Trey a question, and you're agreeing with me, Mars.
Sean.
I agree with you.
Sean.
Mars.
Okay.
I agree
So to finish my point, so he is collecting funds for the victims of the cold card, and he is using those funds. He is not dispersing those to victims of the cold card hack. He is using those funds to rent hash ahead of the mandatory signaling on August 8th, with his stated intention that if the money gets made back from the rented hash, he will then pay the victims back. So it is very much a part of this push. No one was talking about rented hash until the 110ers started all talking about renting hash, like whenever it was 6 months ago. And Crowder did videos about it, and you got that Majorian guy going on podcasts and explaining how you can do it. This is an integral part of what the 110ers have been selling in terms of how to get this across the finish line.
Yeah,
Sean. That's the point.
I think Wicked's response was probably better. I think it was him that said, "Why would you want to do this at a loss rate? Because whatever amount you put up, you get back less Bitcoin. Why not have more of it contributed?" And then he said, "But I have some ideas on how you can find people to help support."
I think
getting their losses.
In general,
I think that's a better message.
In general, when you're doing a fork, I think rented hash is like one of the final stages of fork grief, where you sort of have proceeded through the crying phases and the sad times, and you're just kind of at that last desperation moment before you hit rock bottom.
Well,
it's like a 12-step program, really, and I think that's maybe 11.
Daniel, there's one final step beyond that, which is to capitalize on a crisis where people have lost money. Use that crisis to raise a bunch of money for the victims of that crisis. But instead of paying the victims of that crisis, use it to rent
I thought you were
hash.
almost talking about a Biden-era FEMA scheme when you first started.
This is crazy, dude.
So I'm wondering why you guys are afraid to let Trey answer the question.
We're not. He can go now.
We're just assholes who interrupt people.
I have no idea what
I'm
the
sorry.
question was, bro. You're going to have to restate that.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. It was in reference to the scenario that I think 9 out of 10 people here think won't happen. And that's, let's say, assume that BIP-110 is accepted by all 5 pools, and there's no hard fork. Everybody accepts it. It's now consensus pools. In that scenario, how does Luke now control Bitcoin as the narrative has been spun?
I think Luke doesn't control Bitcoin. I think that's very much hyperbole in that scenario. But I do
Okay, that's
think
good enough for me.
I do think he would have elevated stature, right? Like it. I've said this on previous Bitcoin Today spaces. Is like if somehow this thing succeeds, there's a hell of a lot of people who need to like look back at everything and figure out what we got wrong. Like how could you misunderstand the game theory and misread the signs so um how could you do that so poorly?
Well, Trey,
Right.
it's
Also,
worse. It's worse than that,
hold on,
though.
hold on,
It's
hold on.
worse than that.
He's got full rights to the repo. There's nobody else has like Knott's repo is his. What do you mean? What do you mean how he has control? It's his repo. No one has
His
access to it.
control of knots. No, I think the question was more about does he control Bitcoin in a large way? Does Core like just adopt BIP-110 for the time being, or something
No,
like that? And I think that's not the case.
If BIP-110 somehow activated and that became like an implementation that was being used by the majority, Luke is the only person that has access to that implementation, like that repo.
And even if Core adopted the change, it still just dramatically changes the balance of power.
Everything. It changes everything, of course.
Yeah, and I think the thing Trey was right to bring up, and it's even more of a dire question. It's not just how did we get this wrong. If BIP-110 succeeds, and let's be honest about what it is, it's like 15 to 20% of node operators. So if we talk about who that is, individuals running nodes is like a fucking dingleberry on the ass hair of all the people who own Bitcoin, right? Or economically invested in Bitcoin. Is a tiny fraction of a percentage of people, right? So they own like 15 to 20% of those people run it. They are not representative of 15 to 20% of Bitcoin invested individuals. It's probably way less. Like the vast majority of Bitcoin invested individuals don't know anything about this. They don't even know this nerd fucking war is happening at all. They're like, I bought some Bitcoin. My fucking son told me to go on Coinbase. And you know what I mean? That's who we're talking about here. And so it represents almost actually none of the economic weight in the community. None of the miners, virtually zero Bitcoin companies, a tiny sub fraction of a single percent of Bitcoin holders. And what we're proving here is if that small, tiny Sybil minority can flip the consensus rules of Bitcoin, it is catastrophic. Like we would have put our money into a system where people are like, holy shit, like you can spin up 5,000 little servers and you can change the rules of Bitcoin, even though virtually every economic actor, all miners, and like probably 95% of users do not agree with you. That's fucking scary. Like that actually means that we have a true decentralization problem. And so I don't know. Greg's down there. I don't know what he's going to say. He's probably like, no, it's actually 20% of all human beings. I don't know. Go ahead. What are you going to? I have no idea.
Hi. Yeah, I'm a backer of BIP-110. So what questions would you like me to answer? And answering
what percentage of Bitcoin
what?
invested individuals do you think the 110ers represent? Bitcoin invested individuals. I'm not talking about people who choose to run nerdy software that 99% of humanity doesn't even know exists.
Mm-hmm. So there are about 20,000 nodes in the network of BIP-110, right? So out of 100,000. So
okay, so let's say that those people. So there's about 350 million people that are Bitcoin invested individuals. 350 million people. So let's say there's 100,000 nodes. That is 0.02%. 0.02% of Bitcoin invested individuals. I don't think it's statistically or rationally proper to project the fact that 20% of that infinitesimal microscopic amount of people can be cast on the rest and say that the rest would represent that. So is that fair?
No.
I think a
don't
better
fully understand how you want to arrive at the conclusion here. My point is, like, how do you know whether 95% of the network disagrees with BIP-110?
Because they don't give a shit. That's if you're talking about a fork, okay, fundamentally a fork of this nature, if you're talking about a fork, the fact that there is total abject apathy is a vote. People are saying Bitcoin works for me right now. I'm not, nothing's wrong. Like I send a transaction, it goes through, like what's going on? If we were to say only nodes count, which they don't, customers count, right? If Coinbase, and I've given this example before, did a real legit survey, almost like the miners from Foundry are letting people vote, quote unquote. If they put out a statistically significant survey to the user group and said, you know what, based on how our users poll, if they care about this, that's the way we're going to go in terms of our support, right? There's been no outcry. There's no like, signatory campaigns from websites where users are up in arms. Like no one cares. So their apathy is a choice. It's the choice to say, I don't need a fork. And if you want to convince otherwise, then we should have had 110ers going and lobbying exchanges and other things to say, hey, we know you don't have savvy users who are going to run nodes. They're not technical, but we want to hear from them. We want their vote in the ecosystem to matter. Please get us this sentiment. They didn't do that because I think they'd find that people would say, what the fuck? Like that's what they would answer in the survey. And they wouldn't care. And they wouldn't
No, they
change their
attacked
behavior.
everyone instead. They just attacked every single person that was important in this industry instead. Instead of lobbying them, they just attacked them.
I think that you mistake voting with disagreement. Like, it's not the same thing in Bitcoin. It's not like a, election where somebody votes yes or no. It has, one vote, one, let's say, unit of power. In Bitcoin, if you want to disagree with something, like you have to be active. You can't be passive. It's not just you can vote. It's not that you tweet that you disagree. It doesn't matter. Like you have to really show some conviction, do something about it.
Greg, I think we agree. We agree on that. So I don't believe it's it's not democracy. Let me agree with you on that. It's not democracy. I think we agree on that. It's not one node, one vote, right? It's not that actually 20% of 20% of 100,000 nodes were not 110. It's not like they get 20,000 votes. Everyone agrees on that. It's about economic majority. And what are the economic or consensus forming factors in Bitcoin? There's a few groups. There's the miners. They're very important, right? There's the service providers, which I would throw in like exchanges, like wallets, like, anyone who's like running a service that has users that is Bitcoin specific. And then there's the individuals, right? The individuals who will, and there's two classes of individuals. There's ones who choose to run nodes and ones who don't. But they're actually all the same. Because one thing I've highlighted before is, let's say someone bought a bunch of Bitcoin, but they lost their job for the last couple of years. They haven't bought Bitcoin in a couple of years, but they run a node. And they hold some Bitcoin. They're not actively buying. They're not really doing anything. They're just running a node. And then let's say that there's a person who's never run a node, but they consistently log into one of the exchanges that they frequent, and they DCA or they buy, $100,000 a year. Whose consensus weight do you think matters more? I'm going to tell you the answer is absolutely the person who consistently buys $100,000 worth of Bitcoin a year. Why? Because that's who that exchange is going to listen to. That's the customer that they're going to represent in their support. And that's effectively the coalescence of how consensus is formed. The one person turning on a piece of software in their mom's basement, if they're not really doing anything else to drive the network, does not matter. It really doesn't. I mean, I know that sucks to say that, like, we can't just hit an on button on a little NUC on our desktop and my God, Bitcoin's consensus is being changed.
But in the end, like most people that you are referring to, if they are presented with a choice, and they can decide. Like, let's say that there are two networks, that there's a chain split, and 3 months from now, people on Coinbase or somewhere else may decide, oh, I want to buy this coin and not the other one, and then they make a decision, but they don't make a decision before the chain split, right? And they don't.
I think you're seeing the likelihood of their decision now. I think the abject apathy, because think about this. We've done this with Bitcoin, with BCH, with cred rights, BSV, all that stuff, right? We've done this before. I remember when those coins hit the chain, man, I was so happy. I got so many Bitcoin out of the BSV thing. It was like a Christmas in a fucking summer or something. And I couldn't wait. And everyone was talking about it, and all the exchanges were preparing, and they were putting out notices that was like, make sure your coins are here so you can do it. Like, it was pretty involved. None of that is happening here. Why? Because no one believes that this is going to be a serious thing, and even thinks that users would really want it. And I to a certain degree, don't think the 110ers really think it's serious, because they're not going to put in replay protection until they actually do a proof of work change, obviously, that really splits things off. And I don't think that the exchanges are going to message this to users as like, hey, there's 2 Bitcoins, guys. Like, let's help decide the future. They're going to probably put Bitcoin, the real Bitcoin, and then there's going to be like an avatar probably selected for whatever, B-Jr. is. Maybe it's like Luke in a gas mask or something. And that becomes the coin's avatar. And then you're going to have to make an affirmative choice. You're going to say, do you want to sell Bitcoin with the orange logo and the white B to buy this guy in the gas mask? I don't think many people are going to do that. I think that's probably unlikely, but we'll see. I mean, maybe users will give up on the orange B right off the bat. Who knows?
But they have no choice. Like, nobody provided them choice to decide. There is only one chain, and it will continue. There is no URSF, so nobody has any choice to.
Well, that's definitely not true if hash rate stays where it is right now. If hash rate stays where it is right now, there's a minority fork, and there are 2 chains, and then you need to decide which, for the people who are running BIP-110 nodes, they need to decide whether to stick to their guns and continue, which looks like will lead to a true hard fork and proof of work change. Or will they say, okay, we tried, time to go back to Bitcoin and maybe regroup and try again, or whatever the next course of action will be.
Why wouldn't they avoid the risk of, wiped out chain and create just a URSF? Like, it would be safe.
There's no risk of wipeout if you have 2.5% hash rate on the minority chain. There's no risk.
The longer if there was a kind of a reorg to happen, the longer BIP-110 network exists, the stronger it is.
Let's make it really like argument ad absurdum, just to prove the point here. Let's say there's like 1,000 blocks ahead on the legacy chain versus the 110 chain. What is the incentive for miners to switch to start mining on the chain that is 1,000 blocks behind?
I would ask a different question. What's the incentive for miners not to create a URSF and be on the safe side and go their own way?
They don't need to create
Why
a URSF.
would they put in all that extra effort? They don't have to. So why would they put in that effort?
They can just ignore it. It's a UISF.
Like, you think it's safe for them not to create you think it's okay for them to be on the chain that can be wiped out? Because it can, right?
It cannot if the hash rate does not go to 110.
But they can make it 100% certain that it's not wiped out. But they didn't do it.
Think about the incentive structure. If there's any considerable lead on the legacy chain, no miner is going to look at their past rewards that they've already spent work on, and look back at that and say, okay, now I am ideologically aligned to 110 enough to throw away all of the work that I've already done on the legacy chain to go mine a minority fork, hoping that it will catch up and overtake the legacy chain, and take the risk that that might not happen, which is that they would have given up rewards that they already earned to maybe make rewards on a minority chain, but probably won't, and will have wasted work on that minority chain.
I mean,
This
miners
needs
or
to, it will,
whoever.
in my mind, like it needs to and will probably resolve within the first 10 blocks or so. Like if you look at the current voluntary signaling period, this last one before mandatory signaling, the first, like, I don't know how many blocks it was. It was like, I have to go back and check. I think it was like over 100 blocks or something, maybe 200 blocks before the first signaling block in this period. If that happens during mandatory signaling, it is over. Like there's BIP-110 is dead on arrival if that happens. Now,
So,
there is a little bit more hash rate now that's signaling versus the start of this current period, but it's still like 3 blocks a day or 6 blocks a day or something, like very, very small relative to 144.
mhm. So rogue miners have all the means to create a fork and make it safe so that it's not wiped out 100%. They can just create a client, create their own network, and make it safe for them to mine on it. For some reason, they didn't do it. They didn't even start
Okay,
discussing it.
but you
So
just said
I
rogue
strongly
miners.
believe.
Rogue miners. Who are the rogue
Hmm?
miners? See, like this is a technique or a rhetorical technique that I've seen a lot is if the miners choose to not follow valid blocks and choose to mine invalid blocks, then they are the ones forking off from the network. So see how you're assuming the outcome that you're trying to approve? This is circular logic. You're assuming it, and you're kind of like trying to poison the well with inserting rhetoric that assumes that BIP-110 will win without actually proving how that needs to happen. And the only way that
Yeah, I
BIP-110
mean, right now,
wins
anyone
is if it
anyone
gets the
mining for
majority of hash power, because that's how Bitcoin is defined. It's defined by consensus rules plus the heaviest chain.
Yep, and
yeah,
the
Greg,
heaviest
what do you
chain,
think? What do you
BIP-110
think the
chain, the
conditions?
heaviest one will be the BIP-110 chain, right?
Not if it has
There will be
2.5%. Not if
100%.
it has 2.5%
No,
hash
no.
power.
Even in case of chain split, every chain has 100% of hash power.
But that
So
is
Okay,
changing the definition. That is saying we are forking off and we're calling ourselves the real Bitcoin. That's what that is. Of course, that's true.
and that's
If you
you can try to do that. I mean, Roger tried it. I mean, you can give it. It's been a while. We need some sacrifices. So I mean, like, you can attempt it. I don't see how it's going to happen. Like, if this thing even had, man, if this thing even had like 20% hash power, even though that's nowhere close to winning, I'd still be like a little bit like, well, I don't know. But at 2.5, I mean, this is just, and most of it rented. This is a head fake. This is
20%
it's
right now
nothing.
would have
so
would definitely raise the prospects that BIP-110 would be successful, as I would define it, which is that it activates on Bitcoin, like that things resolve where the entire network focuses in and enforces BIP-110, as opposed to having two chains that operate independently of one another.
all right, what are you afraid of, like from BIP-110 soft fork then?
Okay, well, here, let's go through it. I think it's a completely, it's a misadventure in the sense that everything it tries to change, provably, everything it's changed has no impact on its initial stated goal anyway. I know it's a read the BIP. That's not the goal. The goal being to reduce spam doesn't do that. All protocols have already worked around it. The increased cost is like 0.5%. So it doesn't achieve anything it set out to initially. The only two remaining things it could achieve if it were to activate are, number one, it sends a message. So that is just vibes and feels, literally. I mean, it's another way to repackage that statement. And then the other one was it would shift a lot of dev influence to, Luke and Mechanic. Those are two things it actually would do. It wouldn't do anything effective to the chain in terms of like, oh, spammers can't spam now, but it would do those other more human things, those more ecosystem things. And if that's the goal, I would almost respect more if the 110 people would come out and say, guys, this isn't even about us being able to stop spam. We can't really do it. We're going to play this fork whack-a-mole for another few years just to kind of limit it a little bit. What we really want to install Luke and Co. as the most influential devs, and we want to completely take control of the future direction and technicals of Bitcoin. If they came out and said that, I'd be like, man, at least they're being honest. It can do that. A fork could do that, but it can't do the things that they don't like with spam, because that's a technical thing. I'm always willing to debate the human side of things because humans are squishy and subjective. But when we talk about the technicals, there's no debate there. It won't achieve what they want it to, so it has to be something else.
Of course, on a technical level, it achieves 100% what is specified in the BIP. You will not be able to put one megabyte of return transaction in.
You'll be able to put
1
megabyte spam files. Yes, 1 megabyte spam files. Will I have to write?
You wouldn't be able to.
Oh, you would. You just accompany it with a single line of concatenation code that takes 4 individual pieces and puts them together, which, by the way, is not a legal difference. This contiguity thing is not at all. It's a pseudo-legal concept, so it doesn't affect that. And technically, to smash together a few segments of bytes is literally a one-liner that I could write immediately. Maybe Claude could write it in milliseconds, and it would take me maybe 10 seconds. But anyway, not a barrier. That's my point. Technically, it does not fulfill any of the actual empirical things it sets out to. It's a vibes and feels thing. And I agree that it is some vibes and feels. I wish they would just come out and say, this is for vibes and feels and for taking over Bitcoin's development control. Because that's accurate. That's what it would do.
So, look, there are constraints, for example, on the length of signature, right? And there is a bug on the protocol level that there is no constraint on op return. So what BIP-110 does, from the technical point of view, is extends those safety measures, those constraints, to the fields which were not covered with those constraints before.
Greg,
So
let's assume I definitely understand. Let's assume I know all of those things and all the other things you're going to say about the op rules and the rules that it's changing, because I do, right? Op return at the protocol level, it wasn't a bug. It just was that way always. You could always have, a 1 megabyte block. It was always just this filter that said, hey, everyone kind of agree. We'll just kind of keep it within these bounds. But if your claim is that is its success, it limits it at the protocol level for the data being in that particular place, I would say, okay, that's true. It does limit it being in that particular place, like that 1 megabyte image that you wanted to put in place A. Now you will have to put it in place B. What it doesn't do, okay, is the actual practical outcome, which I kept hearing about, which was, I don't want the image on the chain. It doesn't do that because people just put it, instead of point A, they put it in point B. And so that's what I'm talking about. You're talking about mincing this inconsequential stuff. I'm talking about the actual goal, which I thought was to stop images being put on the chain. And it doesn't do that. So can you tell me about how it does that? Because I don't want to talk about playing, whack-a-mole. Don't talk to me about that. Talk to me about how you achieve your ends.
Okay, so I'm not sure what you are afraid of from BIP-110, but answering your question,
nothing.
if you have
nothing.
If you have a database and you have different fields in the database, you can't put an image in a text field, for example, can you? No, you have another field for that. And Bitcoin has no field for images, and that's what BIP-110 secures, so that nobody is able
before you jumped on, I made this point. I'll make it again. Okay, let's skip to the end of this story where we don't just attack 7 points of consent of the consensus rules. Let's say we gave Luke an open ability to delete any opcode he wants, and let's say in his mind he's like, man, this is the keys to the kingdom right here. I need to go, we're just going to do an all-out assault on spam. In fact, we're going to do the most we can possibly do, which is we're going to delete like 95% of opcodes. Everywhere where you can put multiple hashes, multiple this or that, right? We're going to get rid of all of that, okay? And we're going to leave Bitcoin in a state where all you can do is send from one address to another, the most basic transaction you could possibly imagine, because that's the way that we limit spam. You know what the spammers would do? They just chain together a bunch of transactions in smaller chunks, and your spam would still exist. It's just spread over more transactions. So I don't I just want to skip to the end, because it's not about, just like I said on Stephen Lever's podcast, it's not about parsing the minutia of, well, we tweaked this. It's about how do you get to your goal of blocking spam? You can't. And I'm not saying 100% blocking spam. You really can't even limit it that much at all, even if you just destroyed the opcode set of Bitcoin. So like, can you just, with me, mentally skip to the end? Can you skip to the point where you achieve your goal and tell me how you did it? Because that's where I want to go. I want to go there.
How do you justify that there is less spam on Bitcoin than Ethereum? So if spam is everywhere possible, then why is it that there is less spam on Bitcoin than on Ethereum?
Why
Would
is
you
there
like
less
to
spam on
develop
Bitcoin?
Bitcoin in a way that Ethereum does and invites more spam, or the other way?
No one is thinking because op return consensus rules simply did not change, or that filters that already didn't work. No one is thinking that that's the reason why there's more spam on Bitcoin. In fact, the actual weight of spam, the amount in terms of bytes, is not significantly different, or really any different, after these Core v30 changes. So, provably, this whole narrative around how Core opened up Bitcoin, the shops open for business for spam, just hasn't played out. And it really hasn't played out on the other chains, in the sense that all of that spam has kind of gone to zero too. Like a lot of us predicted, we've seen it fall off like 99%. Why? Because it's stupid. It has no utility. It was a fad. It's like Beanie Babies. Do you wake up every day like in a sweat when you wake up? Oh my God, I had this nightmare that Beanie Babies were back and they took over the world and there's no other toys. It's just all Beanie Babies. Like that's kind of on par with what I think this worry is. It's not that I like the spam. It's just that you got to stop Chicken Littling this, man. It's just not that big a deal.
Go on, Anon.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Daniel, I've been, and I think a lot of people have been very consistent on the cultural aspect of this. Like you're saying you want us to be honest about that. I 100% have always said that my motivation behind this was reducing Core's influence over the network and destroying their reputation around things that they deserved comeuppance for. I'm 100% aligned with that, and I'm happy about the outcome. Regardless of what happens with 110, I'm glad that 20% of the network left Core. That to me is an enormous victory, and I'll be supporting that for the next 10 years of fighting spam or any sort of endless development agenda around innovation. To me, I want the slowest amount of innovation possible. I want to hinder as many corporate entities that want to build some meta protocol on Bitcoin. I want to destroy the reputation of people that are doing these backdoor deals around development. That's my goal.
Well, I commend you. First off, the fact that you can just say that, and I understand like people are upset with Core. I get that. That's totally understandable. But the fact that you say that's why I support the fork is commendable. Most people don't seem to be able to just make that crisp statement. So, yeah, man, I wish more people would just be clear-eyed about it. I do disagree with your. Sorry, I just did a set working on, I'm like out of breath. So I do disagree with your assertion that we should try to hinder a lot of stuff. And what I'm going to probably bring up is there's a bunch of tweets from every well-known 110er about how they actively hindered covenants. Like some of them straight up said, we should not do this until we get this emergency, which is so much more important, the spam emergency. Others were saying, we'll trade you. Like there's a bunch of people with quid pro quo. You do this for us, we'll give you covenants. We'll stop putting stop energy towards that. And it's so ironic that we had this cold card thing happen where if we had covenants, if we could all come together and said, I'm not going to block covenants on like not getting my way with this other fork that I'm fighting over or whatever, we're just going to come together and pick one of the really good proposals. We're going to implement it. We could have had things like reactive vaults. Now, it's not that the 110ers are responsible for the cold card thing, not at all. We had nothing to do with that code, but we could have had some really cool stuff in there, like reactive vaults, where let's say someone puts a vault transaction or a transaction that's protected with a vault. When someone goes to drain that, there's an automatic delay where they could have had a predetermined address with a custodian who probably doesn't have a compromised, obviously isn't running things on a cold card, which allows them to have that transaction move into almost like a pending state, right? It's not going to actually transact for, say, an X number of blocks, which could equate to a day or two or a week or however long they set it. And it allows them to go in and put another transaction in ahead of that one that basically says, no, cancel that out. Actually go to my predetermined rescue address at the custodian, right? So they're operating non-custodially, but then in this rescue case, they dump it with a well-known custodian. I don't know. That could have saved some people, right? It could have really helped if those vaults were in place. And there was a bunch of stop energy. So I disagree with the former person who was speaking that we should hinder all good development, because I think we've seen negative consequences from that so far. Right now, obviously.
So Daniel,
you can do all of this without Bitcoin network. You can do it on your own, system.
I can do a reactive vault on my own system. How's that work?
Yeah,
how do I stop transactions on the chain? How's that work? Can you talk to me about that?
You can have covenants already. Like, I'm pretty sure there are a lot of solutions for that outside of Bitcoin. You don't need to.
So you're telling me I can have a transaction in Bitcoin be delayed from actually executing based on something outside of Bitcoin that Bitcoin doesn't know about? How does that work?
Yeah, you can.
You can?
Like you don't need to.
Interesting.
You don't need to use Bitcoin nodes to calculate, all the conditions for your transaction. You can do it on your own,
I don't
PCs
think we're talking about the same thing, Greg. I really don't think we're talking about the same thing. I think go look up Reardon reactive vaults and then read that, and you tell me if we're talking the same thing, because what you're talking about isn't technically possible. I can't have an attacker get my keys like this cold card situation because they computed my private key and attempt to send a transaction and then arrest that transaction on Bitcoin and instead redirect to my predetermined rescue address. I can't do that with off-chain things in my own system. That's not how it works.
Bitcoin is kind of a settlement layer, so you can have all the other conditions being executed outside of Bitcoin, and only
you literally cannot have a predetermined address path without covenants. It's impossible. It's impossible, Greg. Technically impossible. What you're saying is technically impossible.
I heard a lot of things that are technically impossible, and I know it's bullshit.
Well, I know it's technically impossible. I was humoring you a little bit there, but it's trying to. So anyway,
Daniel and gentlemen, when I can chime in here, and thanks for having me. Then I understand your point was that we cannot stop the spam with BIP-110. But what you're also saying is, I mean, what I don't get is the point, why shouldn't we at least try? Because I think we all agree that the spam we're talking about will hinder us to use Bitcoin as money. So why should we not at least try? Because you said you actually focus more on the human aspect than on the technical aspect.
I think you actually, let me just jump in there. I think you guys should never stop trying. I want to give a huge shout out to the BIP-110 community. This has been the best promotion for Ordinals and runes that we could ever ask for. It's been great. We've been milking the fuck out of this for the last few weeks and a lot of the debates that we had. And it pretty much comes down to the conclusion that you actually can't stop any of these meta protocols on Bitcoin. And if you guys keep talking about it, I think it's going to be great for our bags. So continue, please. A huge shout out to BIP-110. You guys should continue forward on this mission and die with the ship. Go down with the ship, fork off, go to Luke Dashjr's chain. I think that's the best option for you guys. But the reality is this stuff isn't going to stop happening on Bitcoin. If anything, it's going to accelerate, and there's going to be more adoption of these meta protocols on Bitcoin. This has been a great win for us. The Dog Army has accepted this victory, and we are launching our own dog mode, our Bitcoin dog mode Bitcoin client. We're going to try to take off even more of the restrictions that are happening on Bitcoin, more 4 megabyte transactions, and get rid of the dust limit. So that's kind of the route we're going. We're going to create our own implementation to get rid of more of these ridiculous rules and get closer to consensus as close as possible. So greatly appreciate the BIP-110 crowd.
And there you go.
This is one of those times where you're like the Stone Toss comic, where you find yourself on the same side of the rope as someone who you probably disagree with. So
Daniel, I wanted to
Yeah, pick your side right there.
innovation.
Bitcoin is money or that guy.
no, I think it's a false choice, even though we happen to be on the same side of this issue. It's not.
Well,
It's not like
you
it's
know,
going to be.
if I can, I'd say that Ethereum would probably still be on Bitcoin if we didn't make Vitalik not feel welcome. And he publicly stated that. He's like, I didn't feel welcome in Bitcoin, so I went over and started Ethereum. This is a directional thing. We're all trying to look 10, 20 years out in the future. Nobody can tell the future, and I know it's murky. Where we're all on the same side is, we want Bitcoin to be there and to preserve our economic energy in the long term, preserve our value, because we haven't had a money that does that ever. But when you have guys like this that want to turn it into a Swiss Army knife, it's losing its potency. And so my question to you, Daniel, would be, what do you have against BIP-110? And let me preface this. If BIP-110, if you look at it as a system restore, like you run Windows, there's bugs, there's bloatware, right? Bloatware. You're not pro bloatware, and you can reset it back 4 versions back to 2022, the Bitcoin protocol of 2022, before there was Taproot. What's so bad about that?
Because it doesn't do what you want it to in the end.
It does. It's a signal, and it's a direction, and it's the brand. It's brand preservation. At that point, you're saying, spammers, go somewhere else. It's not going to happen. We're going to fight you tooth and nail every way that we can.
You can't do it. I mean, you literally. Okay, so look, here's what I would say.
But if we can't do it, but what's so bad about going back to pre-Taproot?
Trying. I don't want. So here's the thing I oppose about it. Obviously, I think it's absurd to have a fork where literally all the effective outcomes in terms of the spam aren't achieved in terms of like actually limiting.
Well, it's called reduced. It's called reduced. It's not eliminate.
It doesn't reduce it at all. All the literally all
Bitcoin existed for 14 years before Taproot. So what's so bad about going back to that kind of ossification?
Literally all of the protocols that that both you and I would acknowledge are spam have already worked around it. So we can't even say it reduces it. I don't see any people. There's this binary out there. People are like, it doesn't. We don't say it's going to stop spam. Stop meaning 100%. And I'm not making that argument. I actually don't think it's going to stop even a noticeable percentage at all.
Great. So then if it doesn't do that, then what are you opposed to?
This is why I'm opposed. So obviously it doesn't do it with this round. And there is this weird contradiction, and it runs counter to what I had Mechanic kind of assure me. He actually was on a space and said, we will not, after this, keep trying to play whack-a-mole. And I was like, but Mechanic, if the overarching point is that you want to get these people not to use Bitcoin, and you don't want the data there, and we can already acknowledge that this fork does not achieve any of that. It doesn't, because they've already worked around it and they're at current levels. You would have to play whack-a-mole, because if you don't.
So, okay, I get what you're saying, Daniel. Here's what I'm going to say about that. If it may have already, the fact that this conversation has happened, the fact that it went out, this was the necessary part for Bitcoin's future history and past history. We're in it right now. But now is always, right? There's no present, there's no past. It's happening now, and what's happening now will be part of Bitcoin's history forever. This is its anti-fragility in action. And to your point, if this becomes nothing more than a hard fork, it still served its purpose as a kind of system restore. Because if you fast forward 10 years from now and shit went a totally way that you didn't see it going, with Ordinals and with all this bullshit and the government and the op return, we didn't know back then. What I was arguing for was the thing that allowed the government to take over the main chain. you got somewhere where you can go back to. And if that's what knots and then the becomes is a hard fork option for Bitcoin that happened in 2026, just like the other hard forks, so be it. I'm all for it. I'm here for it. This needed to happen. The signal needed to be sent, because if you think there's conspiracy theories about what happened with what happened with Cold Card, I mean, and there's already conspiracy theories, but like what was happening in Core? There's a bunch of suspect shit going on, and this needed to happen, and this is part of their answer for fragility. So all for it, and let it play out. But don't, if you hated Bitcoin in 2022 and you just got into Bitcoin in 2023 because of Taproot, then yeah, you probably should really hate BIP-110. But if you didn't hate Bitcoin before Taproot, what's so bad about BIP-110? I mean,
Well,
ask yourself that.
What's so bad about BIP-110 is I don't believe Mechanic that they were going to not play whack-a-mole. And in fact, he's trying to play the biggest game of whack-a-mole, which is hard fork, right? So not only is he not going to just soft fork again, they're going to hard fork again, which is...
And so what? How does that affect your Bitcoin? How does that affect your Bitcoin?
Well, I think that it definitely pulls a lot of minds and energy away from what will end up being the 90% or 95% of Bitcoin, right? And the real Bitcoin. And
your real Bitcoin's heading straight towards corporate adoption land. This is what you want? That's where you want to go.
So this is
ETF land.
This has been a really fascinating thing for me as a pretty radical libertarian who's, said some crazy shit on my talk. So like,
if you're a libertarian, we're on the same page. Let's go there.
When I first got into Bitcoin, right, 2011, almost immediately I was like, well, if the goal is to really take over M0 money, like globally, right, like effectively unseat the petrodollar and the backing, treasuries and all that stuff that comes.
FIC.
If that was your goal, obviously it includes everyone using it, and not just people, but businesses, institutions, everyone. Everyone's going to use it.
But Trojan horses only work if they don't see it coming, and the financial industrial complex sees Bitcoin happen. And so at that point, is it just confiscation? They're controlling the rails, man. They're controlling the rails, and you got people like.
Just a second. There is a slightly different thing, okay, between a ninja sneaking up in the middle of the night behind just a single person like you, right? Like sneaking up behind you and stabbing you. I believe that is something you can do if you don't see it coming, right? I believe it. Like a ninja could take me out. I wouldn't see it coming. Totally understandable. What I don't think is rational is to believe that the entire M0 layer of money for the entire world would just sneak up on everyone as if it's kind of playing it cool. And then just stabs you all. And then overnight, something that probably would take infrastructure upgrades and everything that would last a decade or more, just from the time you decide that you want to adopt that as your money to the time it's actually rolled out. We can see this with how long it takes to get like chip and pin out in the United States, like all these just technology things, how long they take.
I disagree with you. I don't think Bitcoin. I think your time preference is off. And I think that you're trying to rush it and convince yourself that we need government adoption. Bitcoin doesn't need it. What it needs wide consensus adoption. Yes, from the plebs, not from governments.
I'm not trying to
not from the FIC, financial industrial complex. We don't need their approval. We don't need their.
I am disagreeing with you simply on one fact, that I think it has taken a very gradual and more rapid than I believed it would be. Some people get mad that it's like still at 60K or whatever.
Yeah.
My position has always been, I think it probably would take decades, if not generations, because it's really about old people dying and stuff. And so I think it's ahead of where I expected it to be by a little bit. And I am not saying it takes.
But you would hope, but you wanted it to happen in your lifetime, and you're socially engineering it. And that's Bitcoin is a network, so everybody has high time preference. And that kind of got us into the problem that we're in right now, and BIP-110 had to happen.
I don't agree that my high time preference in my lifetime at 43, I might have a good 40 years. Right?
No. Your high time preference is you want it to happen in your lifetime because you're selfish like every other human being.
Adam.
And when we act out of selfish interest.
Okay, Adam, talk to me. Let's reverse this, okay? Because you said The way that this should happen is it should sneak up on them, right? It needs to sneak up on them in the dead of night, and
no, that's not. No. Hold on. That's not. That was what you
Talk to
said.
me
That
how
was what you
how it
said.
should
I
go.
didn't sneak up on him. Hold on.
You
I didn't
literally
say that.
said that.
No,
You said
no,
a
no, no.
Trojan
I
horse
didn't.
only
No,
works
you said
if it's by
no.
surprise.
All right. Well, let me clarify what I meant.
Okay.
If Bitcoin had a better marketing plan than government adoption and Michael Saylor's ETFs, it would happen naturally. And if we actually and I agree with Gary Cardone on this. If we had a better kind of decentralized team that was a marketing team to get the word out there and have people understand what happened in 1933, what happened in 1971, because half of the people walking around here in Matrix land have no freaking idea. And that's more than 50% of people. So where's the marketing plan on that? Like if that would have happened, then we would have natural adoption and Bitcoin could have ninja'd. All right. Because we would have had, we need to wake people up on a ground level. And we kind of skipped past that and went to, oh, we need government adoption.
Adam, in all
Oh
fairness,
my
though, that's the
gosh.
one thing. That's the one thing we did have. We had, I mean, there's what the fuck is 1971. There's people who talked about Jekyll Island on podcasts, like Marty and them talked about it like
Didn't have
every
it
other
good
week.
enough. But where to catch on? Talk to
Well,
9
but
out of
that's
10.
not
Stop
their fault or Bitcoin's
anybody on
fault.
this, anybody listening to this. Wait, hold
Adam,
on. Everybody in there, everybody in here, do your own survey. Stop 10 people on the street. Ask them if they ever heard of Jekyll Island. And if
but
the answer is
Adam, why
no,
do you
9
think
out
they
of 10 of
didn't?
them, I promise you will say no.
But
Then your marketing failed. And you can't say it's good enough.
marketing, Adam,
All it
come on.
got you to was
Adam,
what?
we
That's
all
it.
started, thousands and thousands of us started this thing. It turned into tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands and
Yeah.
millions. And it happened over 17 years. Okay.
Yeah.
It did happen organically. And we talked on every outlet that we could spread to about these exact ideas you're talking about. And you're saying, well, it just wasn't good enough marketing.
Well, what I'm saying now is what I'm saying where we're at now. What I'm saying where we're at now, Daniel, and you know, believe it or not, we're both libertarians. But what I'm saying now is that this government adoption, and I was a sailor addict as anybody for a couple of years. It sounded great, but I got to a point where I'm like, oh, this kind of took a left turn. This kind of isn't looking so great for Bitcoin anymore, and that's why I think BIP-110 and what happened with
talk
Core.
to me.
There was a
Talk
lot
to
of
me about
things
how
that
you thought. Talk to me about what you. If this adoption curve or this path to adoption or how it transpired with these institutions is not what you would have seen as the way it should or could transpire. Talk to me about what that would have looked like in your hypothetical scenario where, you know, you had this brilliant marketing team. I don't know what that really means, but like you had whatever that thing was and what it would have looked
it's
like.
word on the street. All advertising is word of mouth. All of it, whether it's billboards, TVs, radio. We didn't have enough word on the mouth, and that word of mouth advertising for Bitcoin. And you can't argue that. That's statistically true because you can conduct your own surveys.
Before the ETFs,
yes, sir.
Before
yes,
the ETFs or any of that stuff hit, okay?
Yes, sir.
The vast majority of people did know about Bitcoin. They might not have known intimate technical details, but the vast majority.
Problem. They didn't even go one step down the rabbit hole. But I did that's what got me into 2017 because I was like, what is this Bitcoin thing I keep hearing about? And then you have to read the white paper. And then you have to be kind of like that, you know, that you have to be that little bit of rebel, that little bit of tech and that little bit of anarchist. And if you're not those things, you'll never go down the rabbit hole. And I don't know what it takes to orange pill people to today. You know, if people aren't ready for the knowledge, you can drag a horse to the water of knowledge, but you can't make it drink. I don't know. I'm not here to answer what the marketing strategy is, but what I'm here to tell you is that BIP-110 it needs to happen. We're in it now. And let's see how it plays out. And I think it's all good. It's all good. And if there's a hard fork off this, it's still all good because we needed BIP-110 as that system restore of 2026 Bitcoin. So this is it, man. This is anti-fragility in action. That's all I got to say. Thank you, guys. And I'm not technical enough to answer all the other stuff. This is a libertarian perspective from a financial and an Austrian economics-based approach to Bitcoin, which is very important because all these bells and whistles everybody wants to add. You saw what happened. If you have a cracked foundation, you're still going to get torched. And this thing with Cold Card is this is the smaller microcosm of what you're trying to do to Bitcoin as a whole, and you still can't see it.
But Adam, wait just a second. There's a high irony in what you just said. I went over it earlier. I pulled dozens of the most prominent 110ers, straight up plainly saying in basic English, we should not allow these covenants through before we get this 110 thing through. They're literally the ones who, in large part, were megaphones to their followers to say, obstruct this until we get our way. And this, the covenants thing, happened to be something that could have helped save the funds of some of the people affected by cold
Well,
card.
but what Greg already said, what Greg had said is and I agree with, there's because you have a vision of what you see right now in you can't see the future, bro. So it's like you don't know what you don't know. And if you're encouraging development in a certain direction, it's going to continue in that direction. But if you say, hey, we have to do this on layer 2 without whatever you're talking about, there's going to be other solutions. There's going to be other workarounds. You just don't know what they are yet. And I agree. We need better defenses. Like, how can you have a wallet get drained and you not get an instant notification on your phone that requires a two-factor authentication?
Adam, that's exactly what
Like, that's
reactive covenants.
ridiculous, right?
That's exactly what reactive covenants.
So
can
let's
provide.
make it happen. But can it happen on a wallet? Can it happen within Sparrow or Electrum?
The vast majority of 110ers opposed it because they wanted their thing in first. It became a my way or the highway thing, and they.
But isn't there another way to do it, Dan? Is there another way to do it?
There's not. There's technically not another
100%.
way. You cannot pre-declare an address. That's the point of covenants.
Okay, Daniel, I want to address
so
that directly because you brought it up.
One last thing, guys. That's directly to what you just said, Daniel. I agree with you. It's ridiculous that these people got rugged like that. But here's the thing. When we look at this user activated soft fork, and then we do other implementations moving forward that have, like, what I like about this UASF is it's 12 months. And Greg, or somebody said, oh, it's 12 months. Yeah, because anytime you launch software, there's going to be bug fixes. And anybody that works in software engineering knows that there's going to be bug fixes. And you don't want it to be catastrophic, right? You want all those that iron out, but you got to put it in the real world environment. You got to unsandbox it. That's why 12 months. So we can get back on the same page and work everything out. And if you're talking about these, whatever it is to help with the safety mechanisms, those should be put to a vote, and they will be passed. But they should also be sandboxed for 6 months, 3 months, until we see the other ramifications and the unseen unseens. But yeah, nobody wants to, like, I don't. I get what you're saying, and I try to see both sides, believe it or not. But this is where we are, and I say it's all good in my opinion. Thank you, everybody.
I want to address the covenants thing. So I don't think that there's a lot of people that would have a specific problem with reactive covenants. It's the idea of continuing to build when there's not a problem being addressed. Like, for instance, would you agree that with any innovation comes unintended consequences?
Well, I don't know. With any innovation, I don't know that there's, it depends. It depends.
But as a general principle, as a guiding, like a guideline.
I think as expressive, if something is to the level something is expressive and generative, meaning it can be used for multiple purposes, there's always the possibility that it can be used for purposes you do not foresee.
100% agree. Okay, so this kind of goes to Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which is in mathematics, but let's talk about it in philosophy, which is that no perfect system can be complete and no complete system can be perfect. And that's just kind of a law you can't break. So if you're applying that to Bitcoin, I want Bitcoin to be perfect and incomplete, right? That's what I want. I want perfect money, which means I'm going to sacrifice all the bells and whistles and all the potential cool things it could do, because the more you do that, the less perfect money it becomes. If you have a complete system where it does everything you want, it does everything kind of shitty. And to me, I'm willing to sacrifice everything at the altar of perfect money, which means that reactive covenants and all these cool things, which I will grant you are cool. They're really fucking cool. I don't want them because I want perfect money instead.
I think to get to, well, I mean, I guess, I don't know, hope this isn't a tangent, but I think to get to that point, I think we still need really two things, covenants, a robust covenants proposal, not even just CTB, but like, one of the more robust ones, and a native ZK verifier. And if you add those two, then you could pretty much do everything else you want to do, and they're rather compact. Like the ZK verifier one would be, you would be able to do very expressive things, but in a compact payload that's rather constrained. So if you had those two, I think we could be well on our way for quite some time. Yeah.
So I'd like to follow up on our conversation. So reactive covenants, like you said that BIP-110 people oppose it. I think it's probably they have mixed feelings, and most of them probably don't know what reactive covenants are. And I think generally nobody like supports it, because otherwise there would be kind of a soft fork proposal or something like that. That's first one. The second one is BIP-110 has been reviewed. You said it doesn't achieve what it claims to do on a technical level, and it's absolutely not true. There were thousands of review comments to BIP-110, and including guys who are kind of from core, I would say, from the core organization. So like Mark Ehrhardt. So it's quite well reviewed. I reviewed it myself too. On a technical level, like I think it's very, very good. The scope of it has a single purpose. It's small and simple, so that we limit the risk of unintended consequences. And the 1 year expiry is pretty clever. I already explained that we have this kind of a safety measure. If something goes wrong, so, some unknowns happen during the year, then we roll it back, and we are back in the safe environment. And third thing, you said like you are afraid of us, like that there is a possibility that some energy will be taken out by BIP-110. And I think it's actually good. I don't want to put my energy on spam chain, for example. So if there is a hard fork, if someone wants to go their own way and create Ethereum or something like that, for me it's fine. Like I don't want to. If they don't want my energy, and I don't want to put my energy on the Ethereum, then it's fine. We can have two separate networks, and I'm pretty happy about this outcome.
I mean, I don't know what to say. I would caution against it if you're not economically sensitive at all, and it's like the pure sort of your feelings about it, then certainly you can follow it. But I think that the trajectory of the 110 chain would probably follow something that looked a lot like Bitcoin Cash or BSV, because it's probably going to trend way, way, way lower than Bitcoin over time. So
BIP-110 makes Bitcoin better money. So I truly believe that this will increase value of Bitcoin. So I'm pretty happy to.
I can't overcome beliefs, and I'm not going to. I would never sit here and attempt to do that. You're entitled to your own beliefs, but I just from a purely caring for, I don't know, at least the economic side of what you represent. Your personal, you as an individual, if you have family, whatever. I don't think it's going to be something I would invest in long term, I guess is the polite way to say it, I suppose.
And if you love wizards and cat photos or whatever, good luck to you too.
Do you know, so one thing that should be said, I have and maybe the other folks on here who are, more like the spammer people could be honest about this, but I truly believe that if they fork off, you're probably going to have a lot of spam on that chain, because they will probably do it just to spite you. Like they might just do it to fuck with you. So just be prepared for that, at least, I would say.
I disagree, because we will fight spam. Unlike the other chain, there will be people who are indifferent to spam. So if they want to defend their chain, then their chain will be spammed as hell, unlike ours.
I think they're going to spam it to try to get you to fork of like a zillion times on the other chain, honestly, just to highlight the futility of it. And it would be in some ways even more of a draw, like a dry spam effect, if you will.
Dry spam effect. That's good.
I think they will spam Ethereum more than Bitcoin with BIP-110.
Let's just see if there is a strike spam effect. I would love. I'm going to actually put a website up just because of that name, right? Like strike spam or something.org, and we can see like what the rate of spam is.
Everybody out there listening, this is perfectly natural evolution in action, and it is the way that nature works. So this is Bitcoin behaving exactly as Bitcoin is intended to work for its anti-fragility and moving forward. And we're going to see, who eats who and what happens. But don't let anybody convince you that they can tell the future and it's their way, because that's the one that's trying to scam you.
I'm just gonna hop in real quick. I know I have my hand up. Just wanted to say, so I grew up, in the 80s and 90s, and you see code change throughout the day. But one thing I have realized is, isn't it easier to keep it simple, stupid? So like all these other prompts, all these other UIs, doesn't that literally add more attack vectors? And I think the more features that are added is literally adding more attack vectors. So I think you just, keep it simple, stupid, man.
I think you are exactly right, and that's why Satoshi didn't include loops in the script, for example, right? He wanted to limit the risk. Also, he created the script as a state machine, so it's a kind of an abstract that allows us to make some reasoning about what it does. So I fully agree with you. Let's keep it simple. If we want to make some magic, we can make it on other networks. We can create something super different. We don't need to mix, DNS and file storage and all the other, whatever, into Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, and to add some more complexity and confusion to the conversation, correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel, doesn't Luke support covenants, which is like something I would disagree with him on, and I think many other people would. So there's not like a monolith here. But I think the principle is that many BIP-110ers don't want to see runaway innovation happen because we see it as an attack vector.
I think Luke likes covenants, as far as I know. Yeah, and I also disagree with him about it.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Hello, Neil. Welcome. Go ahead.
Yes. How are you? Can you hear me? Yeah,
You're good.
X has been acting a little bit boogie these days. I just want to mention that there's a link that I'm gonna share from Geyser. I think it's their like fund me, but with by Bitcoiners, like a fund me account, and they put it. They sent a tweet today where they were saying that there's some billionaire willing to donate for development on Bitcoin because they want to see it grow. And they were asking a survey, what are the areas that they need the most as a community? So again, I tried to share that on the Nest. But what that prompted me to think is how great it is, right? This is an open source. And whenever there's an attack or whenever there's a flaw, we jump as a community, we unify. And there's a lot of people willing to chip in and donate. Maybe they don't have the time, maybe they don't have the expertise, but maybe they have the money to donate to a cause. So kudos to that. I'm gonna share that, and I think that's the right approach. How can I help? How can I help instead of demanding, from anybody else? Just be proactive, like many you've seen here in the community. There was a problem, they step up, they didn't complain. They just say, how can I help? So anyways, I think that's the spirit. And thank you, everyone, for being part of this community.
Yeah, and I think like what you just said, is kind of like what I was saying as my point is like the more you add on like the main chain, the more attack vectors you have. So why not put that on a layer two, like lightning or strike or other places, and let that be the worrisome? Because if we're starting to have problems like this in the checksum right now, and AI and Anthropic and everything's going to start getting involved, because now that this attack vector that happened with Cold Wallet, you're going to have AIs out there grinding keywords. So, I mean, I think that's like a, I'd be worried 100%.
Going back to the whole topic of adoption versus government adoption, I mean, did we get government adoption? I don't think we got any adoption from government. We got a big campaign, and then we got a bunch of legislation for stablecoins. And I'm still waiting to see where the adoption comes from. We got them to announce that they're going to steal people's Bitcoin and call it the reserve. So like what happened there that was good for Bitcoin? And we got a big marketing campaign that went nowhere.
I would say to not really counteract that, but I mean, there's one thing that consensus will always be is that there'll be 21 million Bitcoin. So whichever the main chain is, that's going to be the one. I mean, if it's legacy chain, if BIP-110, I think it's an absolute ridiculous argument. And I think the argument between BIP-110 and Core, I'm with Gary Cardone on this one. I think it's a stupid argument inside the Bitcoin community. And I think it's making people like worry about Bitcoin. So, whichever one wins, this is how we did it back in the day. Men stand up and fight. So pull out your swords and be ready to go.
All right, sword fight. Humble, are we going to wind it down? I think it's like 12 on the West Coast here.
Yeah, I know. I believe we are. Terrence and I were talking about that. I do see a couple faces on stage that haven't said much for a little while.
Uh,
Just wondering if anyone had any closing thoughts.
humble,
Otherwise, I
humble.
think.
Can I add one
Yep.
thing to what was just said? Thank you. 21 million coins has been advertised to everybody as also that it's not changeable, but that's not true. And it's the same way that gold, that physical gold, they couldn't replicate that from the periodic table. Once they had it in custody, they could issue as many paper issuances of gold as they can, and the end result is the same thing. When you side with miners and you go, oh well, this halving, we're not making enough money. At 10 years from now, don't be surprised if yours continues to be the main chain and you're siding with miners and you're bending over to backwards for miners, that 21 million is not 21 million. And it's the same thing. If you look at, if you say you're Austrian economics, you should be on side BIP 110, because Keynesian economics is what allowed there to be constant issued money. And it's the system we're in right now. It's the hell we're all living in. And it's what Bitcoin was formed to fix. But you have to maintain that fixed supply. It is an absolutely crucial, non-negotiable aspect of what is money. And once you vary from that, you're right back in the Keynesian shit that we're all in right now, where anybody can screw you, whoever holds the most Bitcoin. And you look at Saylor, confiscation's confiscation. You're taking it off the market. Yeah, it's going to make price go higher. You want price go up? Yeah, take it off the market. But it doesn't matter if it's a government or strategy, whoever. Yeah, it's going to push the price higher, but it also gives them the ability to issue derivatives, and you just change Bitcoin into the Keynesian system in a different way. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, Adam. Thank you. Terrence, are you there? Oh boy. I know that there is another space going on right now. Wicked is hosting again. So if you guys are done with the BIP-110 talk, I'm sure they're talking about self-custody and security measures over there. I see your text message. Okay. Yes, Terrence, I think it is time to
Oh,
wind down.
hey, we winding down?
Yes.
Sorry, I had to step away. The conversation's been so good, and every time I come back, it was the same subject to most of what many of us know. But I always like hearing people hash it out. Thanks everyone for coming up here, Greg. I don't know who you are, so you're newer, but I appreciate Daniel being here and Anon as always. Thanks, Humble, for holding down the fort. Lauren had to go. I think he was taking a Tesla test drive, and I had to write a mortgage, but I'm back.
Wow. Look at all that stuff that got done during this time. It's amazing.
I know. It's
Such great
fantastic.
multitaskers.
Yeah. So, in the interest of time, I'll rug it, unless anyone else has any final thoughts they feel like sharing, but don't feel you have to. So just unmic and go to it.
Hey, just want to say appreciate you guys for the space. Terrence, Humble, always a pleasure, my friends. I know I'm just a Pokemon card on the internet, but yeah.
Beautiful. Anyone else?
Yeah. Thank you guys for hosting. Appreciate everybody and love hearing all the different opinions. And yeah, we're exactly where we need to be right now. And I'd say everybody have confidence in that. It's called growing pains for a reason. Sometimes it's painful.
I'd also like to thank you for hosting me and invite you to the spaces on Saturday. We will witness BIP-110 activation live. So see ya.
Woohoo!
Thanks for joining, Greg.
Beautiful. Daniel, any last thoughts, or maybe you're already off to the next one?
Oh no, I just I feel for some of the reasons why people are doing what they're doing with 110. I don't think the vast majority are like bad people, bad actors. I just disagree with that path, and hope that we all can unify at the end of this.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, everyone. Thank you, and thanks so much, Humble.
Yeah, we'll see you guys.